Welcome to a brand new episode of Part of the Problem. Of course, I'm Dave Smith. Of course, he is Robbie the Fire Bernstein. How you doing today, sir?
I'm doing well, getting ready for some Texas porches. How about yourself, Mr. Smith?
Ooh, Texas porches. That sounds fun. Where in Texas are you this weekend?
Oh, I got Rockport, Texas on Saturday. I've got San Antonio on Friday, and then Austin on Sunday, all stacked with some fine Austin comics. Going to be a good time.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah. Sounds good. And the porchtour.com is the site, as I've been led to believe.
Porchtour.com. And then like 10 days out west and an upstate New York, Canada run. We're getting all over the place. Check it out.
Upstate New York. Beautiful country up there. I was just up there myself. Okay, yeah. And also then in a couple weeks, me and Rob will be out in Salt Lake City, back at the Wise Guys out there, which is a great club. Looking forward to that. And then a bunch of road dates that we'll be on together for the rest of the year. You can find at comicdavesmith.com. And as I mentioned in the last episode, I will say once again, my weekend, at the Mothership, the ticket links are up. Once again, I did a better job of this last year than the year before, but warning people, if you want to come, go get tickets now, because the shows at the Mothership sell out quickly, and I want it to be, some of my people in there, not just Mothership people. So go grab tickets. It's always a really, really fun time. Really fun time. That last year, my weekend at the Mothership was, and I've heard from a bunch of people who were there that it was the Saturday shows, I guess. But it was one of my favorite nights of stand-up comedy in my career, there's been a lot of nights of stand-up comedy. It was the day that Trump got shot. And it literally happened. I mean, I was about to walk over to the club from my hotel. I was leaving. I was like getting my stuff together, leaving my hotel, and my phone just started blowing up. I just went on there and saw the video of Trump getting shot at, and then did shows right after that. It was crazy. It's a fun time, fun night to do shows.
I was there for the Saturday early show, and just there was a silent observer in that nice little VIP upper deck, and it was one of the best sets of comedy I've ever seen, Mr. Smith.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you. It's fun. There's moments sometimes like that you just can't recreate, but like there's a thing where you just go, and I think I did like a half hour on, probably did like half of my headlining set on the thing, but it's like we all just saw this thing. It was so crazy. Like we're all kind of like, okay, let's unpack this together, and so it was a really fun set. So anyway, I don't know how I'm going to top that this year, but I'm gonna have to set up a very high level assassination before my shows in August. Okay, so speaking of high level assassinations, the Kennedys are known for that, and Bobby Kennedy is the Secretary of the Health Department. There's been some interesting movement over at the Health Department over the last couple days. It's been, I don't know, so. And maybe this is kind of like a broader, topic, which I don't know. We spent so much time over the years talking about it. But so Bobby Kennedy just came out and said that the health department is no longer recommending that healthy children get the COVID vaccine, which is good. It's some of us might have been hoping for a little bit more out of this administration, but hey, that's a positive step in the right direction. But I have just because I guess partially because I guess yesterday or the day before was the 5-year anniversary of George Floyd's death. And so, and then also with the health department doing a reversal on the vaccines, it's just been, I've been thinking a lot about like those years, and there's been a lot of the compilations that are on Twitter of like what the media was saying at the time. And it's so strange now, 5 years later, to look back at 2020. Obviously the vaccines, we're talking more about 2021, 2022. But it is wild, like how much happened in half a decade, in the last 5 years. And so there is something, as we're kind of climbing out of that, it just brings up a lot of these memories of how crazy everything went. Anyway, Good move by Bobby to stop recommending that kids get this thing. It is one of those things though, like when you just watch, even when government policy gets it right, it lags so far behind. Like what are we even on? What COVID strain are we even on? I don't even know what you call it. Like the last one I learned was Omicron. I have no idea what strain of COVID this is. It's certainly not the same one, right, Rob? It's got to be a different one now. I'm sure it's less deadly. It's like you've gotten to a point where the thought of a kid having like a severe negative outcome from COVID is like statistically impossible. I think kids get healthier from having COVID at this point. And like, so now they're finally like, oh yeah, we're not recommending you take that vaccine anymore, which by the way, at the height of it, almost no one was giving this thing to their kid. Like even at the height of it, when the overwhelming majority of adults had complied with getting the jab, some of us, me and you, Rob, remain purebloods. But even at the height of it, people weren't giving it to their kids in large numbers. Now you're almost like, what? Who is even thinking about that? But anyway, they're not recommending it, and that is good.
I thought COVID just went back to being the flu. That's what I thought. I thought we were just done with it. And you know what? At this point, if any parent out there wanted to give their kid the booster shots and give them to them every year and every 6 months, maybe they should just get the Darwin Awards for getting rid of their own offspring. You can just do it at Planned Parenthood as very late abortions. I'm shocked that any doctor in the country was still recommending this. I'd be surprised. I'd love to know the numbers of how many parents were going into a doctor's clinic and recommending the latest COVID booster. This seems like no longer relevant information or policy that even needed to be made. I'd love to hear the numbers. It just seems shocking that this announcement needed to be happen. And if we're going to revisit COVID, let's be prosecuting Fauci. I don't need these little tiny announcements about something that people shouldn't have been doing anyways. And I'm surprised was a law or a recommendation that was even still on the books.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, look, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I understand legal technicalities with the auto pen aside that Fauci does have a blanket pardon. So I don't know what how practical it is to prosecute him at this point, but I'd even be happy with just presenting the case.
Find him guilty, like even just for the hell of it, and parade him in front of Congress and actually force him to answer all these questions and unwind some of what was going on behind the scenes that he pushed this as far as he did.
Yeah, it's a tricky situation because there is a bit of a balancing act, and part of the balancing act, and this is, by the way, one of the reasons why I don't like racialism. I don't like people. I don't even like demonizing the left or the right, which I'm sure I've been guilty of a time or two. I'm not like trying to say I'm better than anybody else on this, but I think there is, we're all in a country together. And even if you could imagine a scenario where the United States of America's government ceases to exist, which is pretty out there, at least today, let's just say hypothetically, the central federal government was dissolved and we went to being 50 state governments, which seems like pretty crazy. Like that seems pretty beyond the pale that the USA doesn't exist anymore. But even so, we'd still be neighboring countries. Like we're all still here, and it's better if we can get along than not get along. And I think it's unfair when entire groups of people get demonized. I'm much more comfortable with demonizing the powerful, as I think they deserve it. But so like essentially what I'm saying is like, in a way, we have to move on from like the craziness of the last 5 years and of the last 15 years. And things like COVID insanity has completely receded into the background now. Like nobody's really pushing it anymore. I mean, you still will see people like masked up at the airport. I don't know, maybe sometimes they have a cold or something like that. I do get the impression that there still are
that they have a stupid disability.
Yes, right. Well, there still are some percentage of people who are still living in that like paranoid state about germs. But it is such a small percentage. It's less than 1% of the people. Me and Rob are both very regularly at airports, so we see this, but like it's a very small percentage. Nobody is really like pushing any of this stuff anymore. It's kind of like, even more so than the wokeism. Wokeism has also receded tremendously, and it's not being pushed the way it was. But there is something where like, okay, look, we got to move on. We got to find a way to be a society and move forward together. But at the same time, sometimes there's something that's just too crazy that you're like, yeah, we can't just sweep that under the rug and pretend none of that happened. That doesn't seem like a satisfactory answer either. And I do, as we've said many times on the show, we are firm believers that the people at the top who committed heinous crimes should be prosecuted. There should be accountability for at least some people. And I do think in a weird way, that's what would allow us to move forward in a healthy manner. But we will see. Not holding my breath on that. So there was Bobby Kennedy gave an interview to that CNN lady whose name I can't remember. It's like you get to a point where she's like of the newer crop of corporate hacks. And I'm just like, I'm over. I can't memorize any more of your names at this point. I know the whole old school. I know the older, better generation of hack journalists. But anyway, it's the one who did the town hall with Donald Trump last year. But so he gave an interview to her, and there was this one portion which is going super viral and kind of touches on a similar subject to one that I found myself embroiled in, and it was over the role of expertise and trusting the science. I found this very interesting. And then, of course, in this clip that we're about to play, Wolf Blitzer, he's from the older school of corporate hacks whose names I know. He was interviewing Lena Wen about this. Let's play the one. It's Tom Elliott's tweet. Great Twitter follow, by the way, Tom Elliott. Go follow him. This I found fascinating. I wanted to get your thoughts on it as well, Rob. So let's play this clip.
Listen to this.
Trusting the experts is not a feature of science. It's not a feature of democracy. It's a feature of religion and totalitarianism. What we should do is trust the science. And we are going to do the science, and the science is going to be replicable, and it's going to be gold standard. People should not be taking medical advice from somebody who is not a physician, but they should also be skeptical about any medical advice. They need to do their own research.
Dr. Wen, what do you think of that message?
Well, I'm confused by that message, and I bet that many people are confused about this too. Look, I'm a clinician. I talk to my colleagues who are physicians and nurses all the time. And yes, we do our own research. And yes, we look at scientific articles and we parse through them. We look at recommendations. But the thing is, there are lots of different clinical topics. It's not reasonable to expect that even clinicians and scientists look at the medical literature all the time and parse through the literature ourselves on every single topic. This is the reason why we looked at guidelines. There are medical organizations that synthesize these data. By the way, we look up to the CDC, or at least throughout history, we have looked up to the CDC, to the FDA, to compile these studies for us and to make recommendations. And this, we have always, throughout history, depended on our federal agencies as the gold standard for expertise, for information, for unbiased scientific data. And so it's very confusing and quite distressing, actually, to hear the person who heads up these agencies, to whom these agencies report, now say that expertise cannot be trusted. I'm confused because it leaves people wondering, well, what sources of information can I trust?
All right. So again, I found this to be interesting because and in the longer version of the clip, I mean, Bobby Kennedy, the CNN woman is like dumbfounded by this point that Bobby Kennedy is making. And the point is essentially that, like, yes, there's science and knowledge is not religion. It's not an article of faith that a high priestess tells you what is true and then you trust that person. You should try your best to be informed and make informed decisions and, like, educate yourself on say, whatever the topic, in this case, vaccinating your children and things. And it is funny that especially, I mean, I guess like the first thought is that for all of the people who shouted so loud for so many years about threats to our democracy, including this current president of the United States, it's the most anti-democratic worldview they have, that this is a crazy thing. She's confused. Dr. Wen is confused that you would suggest that we shouldn't just trust the expert class and that we should encourage people to educate themselves. It is such an obvious it's such an obvious view. And this idea that, for years we looked up to the CDC. I'm sorry, who did? Who looked up to the CDC for years? I'm sorry, I just never knew this was a thing. I'd never once in my life heard a real person have a real moment where they talked about how much they admired the CDC. I mean, I know during COVID, there were a lot of people who started having like a religious devotion to the CDC and believing everything they said, and they got everything wrong. Everything. So like, what the hell are we even talking about here? Is truly bizarre. Like I said, obviously this very closely mirrors an argument that was launched at me a few weeks ago. And number one, I think it's the dumbest non-argument imaginable. Number two, you're like, man, you guys got to read the room, because no one is buying this bullshit right now, especially in the wake of this catastrophe. So I don't know. Anything you want to add, Rob?
All right. First, I just have to say, I really dislike that lady.
She's awful.
The second she starts talking on a personal level, I dislike her. What's interesting to me here is I think one of the reasons why people like democracy and they like the illusion of government is that they like the idea that there's an adult in the room and that they're able to handle things. And so they like the idea of, there's going to be an expert class. The expert class will be appointed by the government. They will go and do their research. And so I don't have to think about or worry these things, because there's going to be an expert recommendation that came from this government system that's very good at doing it. And I think what we just learned through COVID is they are not, and they do not have your best interests in mind. In fact, they've probably been hijacked by corporations, and they will use that power to rob you of your freedom or your wealth, or to rule over you in whatever capacity they can. And so we kind of have to, as you said in your debate multiple times, we got to embrace reality. We got to see the world that we live in. And so after the failures of COVID, that's partly why Bobby Kennedy is now in that position, is because people really don't like what happened over COVID. He had the storyline more accurate than our government did. And so now he's letting you know, yeah, we can't trust these institutions. They're kind of corrupt. I'm here and I'm cleaning it up. And in the meantime, I'm not a doctor. I can't make recommendations. And there's a little buffoonery in that, but we'll just go with it. I'm not a doctor. I can't make recommendations. You're going to have to do your homework. People don't want to hear that because they don't want to be responsible for their own decisions. It's a lot easier to live in a world view where just one government expert tells you, hey, here's the food pyramid. Eat muffins. Muffins are good for you. And then you go, I'm going to eat muffins. That's what the government told me. And if you're a doctor, it's a lot easier not to really have to do your job and to just go, hey, there's no liability on me. If I just take, why do you even need to have a job then? If you're just going to repeat the recommendation from the CDC, why can't I just go into like a chat GPT type thing for the CDC and go, here, what's the recommendation? Why do I need to see a health? Would I even pick a health expert if you're just going to repeat their gospel? So I think, the honesty of RFK here of, hey, government is failing you and we cannot just rely on these recommendations, I think undermines the entire pitch of government, which is, hey, you can just outsource and trust us to handle things.
Yeah, no, I get that's a good point. And I think there is something that's a little bit more unsettling about, understand, like, as you said, grappling with that reality, that there isn't this, that there isn't this class of experts who are trustworthy and who you can kind of turn your brain off and outsource your thinking to them. I don't know how anybody still lives with that illusion. It's like it's just been so obviously shattered. But of course, then which again, I know about this a little bit too, but there is this intentional conflation that where, it's like if you say that you shouldn't just trust the experts and that you should do your own research and you should educate yourself on a topic, that does not mean that you're rejecting the concept of expertise. That doesn't mean that you're saying that, like, oh, there aren't legit experts out there. Like, obviously there are. But as Bobby Kennedy has made this point in other areas, and I always thought this was a really great example, was that he goes, because he was an environmental lawyer for years, and he goes, every suit that I ever brought, like, the prosecution had experts and the defense had experts. And we called these we called them these expert testimonies, and they would say that diametrically opposed things. Because you could find experts who view things this way, or you could find experts who have the complete opposite opinion. Like, still to this day, this is true across every field. Across every single field. In economics, you can find professional economists who will argue that raising the minimum wage will hurt, will lead to an increase in unemployment. And then you can have others who will argue it won't. And they're both experts. They're both trained. They've both studied. They have exactly the opposite views. And this is true across every single field, And so, this kind of, when you live in a world where over the last, however many years in recent history, the expert class, the expert foreign policy class has been pushing us into disastrous wars. The experts in economics have been pushing us toward devastating economic policies. The experts in health have pushed us to devastating health policies. And that a huge component to this kind of like expert to the makeup of the expert class is also who ends up getting into the positions of power in government. And, Rob, I've noticed this tendency that the experts whose expert opinion is that the government ought to have a lot more power end up being disproportionately represented in the official expert roles within government. And like this is very obvious. You could look at this across, like, nobody can actually argue that this isn't the case, because it's true across every sector. And one of the things that's really amazing that's been, I think, revealed on a mass level throughout the COVID insanity is that there are so many people, Dr. Wen being one of the chief examples, who not only, it's so bizarre because she has not only completely walked away from what she was saying just a few years ago, she would never bring up what she was saying a few years ago. And she won't even be in an environment where anyone will bring it up to her face and like push her on it. Like, hey, you literally said this. And she was out there, Rob, if you remember, we played it on the show years ago, but she was the one out there saying that we can't give people their basic liberties back if they're not vaccinated, because we need that as an incentive to make them get vaccinated. Now, she can't defend those comments anymore. She's a goddamn monster for holding these views publicly. And yet, so simultaneously, she's like, hey, completely forget about all that stuff. Completely forget about my track record. But I'm also still going to lecture you about how we're the real experts and we're the ones you really have to trust. I mean, especially, it's just so wild. And look, as I've said many times before, I'm really not the expert when it comes to this health stuff. And I'm not claiming I'm an expert on any of the stuff that I talk about, because I'm not a real expert. And there are experts who are diametrically opposed. I just saw earlier today that Piers Morgan is hosting another debate between Benny Morris and Norman Finkelstein today. Now, these are two real experts, like legit experts on the history of Israel-Palestine. Again, they have completely diametrically opposed views, And so what are you left with? It's like, I don't know. I guess I'm going to read both of their books and see who I think is more persuasive, which is what I've done. I've read books by both of them. It's like, and by the way, I think Benny Morris's books were really, really good. 1948 was phenomenal. Really good book. But like, okay, I think he gets it wrong ultimately in his conclusion, or at least his conclusion today. But anyway, but just being a layman when it comes to the health stuff, to listen to anyone sit there and go like, okay, first of all, I've argued with my former family pediatrician who is arguing with me to get my 6-month-old vaccinated for this thing. I was clearly right, and the doctor was clearly wrong. Also didn't know anything about it. But even beyond that, it's like, dude, the CDC, the health establishment in this country gave us the fucking food pyramid. Like, this is what me and I don't know if you remember, Rob, we're a few years separated in age. I can't remember who's older or younger.
By the old standards. Muffins are the most important and nutritious food you can consume. That and with bread. It's what's at the top, the base of the pyramid.
Yes, that's what you're supposed to. This is what they told us. I remember being told this in school. Like they had it on the blackboard, like pulling it down on a rolly thing and showing us the food pyramid. That's what they told us. You know, you're going to want to limit your meat and vegetables, but have a lot of white bread. Really cram in that white bread. And listen, I'm sorry, but you see this everywhere, that when you, like, the hippie who was hanging out at like a farmer's market was 100,000 times more correct than the expert class was when it came to health. It's like, I'm sorry, we live in a disgustingly unhealthy society. It is. I mean, I'll tell you, as somebody who travels the country a lot, I cannot tell you how many obese children I see. I'm talking 7, 8-year-olds who are obese.
You go waddle sometimes. You get them hiding by the elbows. It's like pushing an old lady in a wheelchair.
Yeah, it is. It's really disturbing when you see it so much. But like, I'm sorry, like to just like anybody who actually cares about health must be disgusted by this entire system. There's just no way you could be defending it. I'm sorry. You walk into the supermarket and everything, and even in like nice neighborhoods, like you walk into the supermarket, it is just dominated by like aisles and aisles of gushers. You know what I mean? Just like poison, absolute garbage that is killing our people. If you turn on the television, every other commercial is for a fucking pill that you're supposed to. This is the expert class's view on health. Have a whole lot of white bread, some candy, and then take a pill to deal with it. Also, you're going to want to take a pill to deal with how you're depressed from all of it too. And it's like, I'm sorry, none of this is good health advice. And then obviously you had the biggest, if you are an expert in healthcare or in health in general, you had the biggest test of your life come before you, the once in 100-year pandemic, and you failed it on every single level. You got absolutely everything wrong. So how on earth do you turn around after that and be like, I'm in a position to tell you that we ought to be trusted and you can't do your own research? And while it is true, like there is a point to what she's saying where she's like, look, like there are technical questions in which you need a level of expertise to interpret data and to understand things. While that is true, it's simply not the case. And people often use that to make a case that is not true. And it simply is not true that a regular person of reasonable intelligence cannot read and gain perspective on things. And by the way that us non-experts do that typically is that we inform ourselves by reading experts. Because believe it or not, there are a lot of experts who also disagree with your official experts, and some of them make very compelling arguments. And so you read them, and then you read your hack experts try to counter those arguments. And one of the things that ends up pushing a lot of people away from the regime official experts and toward some of these more dissident experts is that you guys tend to not have a response to the points that they're making. And instead, you immediately go to attacking the character of the people making the arguments. And that is a tell that typically means it's because you can't take on the actual argument. And that's part of the reason why you guys are losing this war very badly. Any other thoughts on this stuff, Rob?
It's enough Lena win for one day. Hopefully we don't see. I can't believe they still roll her out. Once again, still a health expert.
Yeah, it's really, it's not even, and it's not just, there's a mix of two things. And this is true with a lot of the people, who exposed themselves during COVID, but it's not, there's number one, there's the stuff that they just got wrong. Like how much they just got the whole thing wrong. I mean, like not small things, like really, really major things. And by the way, nobody's done a better job of tearing this stuff to shreds than Tom Woods. His book Diary of Psychosis was phenomenal. Also, his online quizzes that he made with all the charts and graphs. I mean, it's all almost all of it's in Diary of a Psychosis. But he really demonstrated this stuff. And by the way, he's got degrees from Harvard and Columbia, so I think he's allowed to have an opinion on this, or maybe not. I don't know. Does that qualify you as being expert enough? But there's, literally like all of it didn't work. And this is like pretty clear at this point. There's been major studies done on this. I know that one of the biggest ones was the Johns Hopkins study that looked at all the lockdown areas versus the not lockdown areas and could find almost no difference. It had lockdowns or not locking down had almost zero effect on how much the virus spread. Mask mandates didn't work. School closures didn't work. Vaccine mandates didn't work. Every policy that they pushed just didn't work. So that's part of it. It's like, no, you lose the expert claim because you're wrong about everything. What good is expertise if you're wrong about everything? But then the more disturbing thing is that it just exposed like what tyrants these people were in their heart of hearts. That which has nothing to do with expertise. It has nothing to do with how well you know any subject. There's a more fundamental question of how you view liberty. And when you start saying, when you're Arnold Schwarzenegger, and if you remember his quote, Rob, where he said "fuck your freedom." This was his message to the unvaccinated.
Just before
fuck your freedom.
His goat.
Yeah, right. And you're like, yo, wait a minute. This is somebody who held political power in the United States of America. It was a governor of one of our biggest states. That is wild that you view freedom as this thing that can be taken away when at the whims of rulers. That is profoundly disturbing. And we should never forget those people. Those people who are in positions of power who became tyrants immediately.
It's almost surprising to me that at these news networks, they don't have to pay the doctors better for 2 years and be like, we need your help selling this storyline, and that they pay them enough that they don't have to continue to work after that, because I'm shocked that they don't need new experts to come in and sell the next story. I'm shocked that after you gotten this many things this so wrong, and not just wrong, but where you were pitching the country on stripping people of their freedoms, the fact that you can still go on television and share your opinion without people just protesting the offices of CNN in a peaceful manner and saying, please put someone else on the air, is
asking very nicely. Yeah. No, the fact that they don't recognize that they have to kind of get rid of all of these people in order to rebuild any credibility is kind of amazing. I'm not necessarily upset at it. It's good in a way that they're this incapable of adjusting to the facts on the ground. Hey, so okay, let's switch gears a little bit, because we should talk a little bit about the latest developments over on the fronts with both the proxy wars that we're involved in. It's none of them are particularly good. But it's very interesting that it looks like there's been some good reporting on this. I sent you the piece that Jeremy Scahill had over at Dropsite Jeremy Scahill's a legit expert, but he's a legitimately a great journalist who's done some phenomenal work over the years. His book Dirty Wars was phenomenal, and he's just been great on the foreign policy stuff in general for the last 20 years or so. So he had a great piece about this. Axios had a piece about it as well. But evidently, Witkoff and Hamas came tentatively to an agreement that seems to have then been killed by Israel. The agreement would have gotten 10, or the deal was that to return 10 living hostages in exchange for, I believe it was a 60-day ceasefire and some humanitarian aid and things like that. Looks like the deal, Israel weighed in and killed the deal. They said it was in effect a surrender to Hamas and all of this stuff. And it's like one more example. Obviously, there have been too many to even list off here, but it is like yet again, one more example of Israel being the impediment to any type of progress, toward the prospects of peace. It's one more example of Israel clearly not retrieving their hostages as their highest aim. And it's just one more example of like why the U.S. should not be allied with Israel. They're clearly taking steps that are not in our interest. But the other thing that I just couldn't, as I was reading about this last night, I just couldn't help but find myself putting myself in this position. But like, can you imagine if that was like your family members? Like that was someone you loved who was one of the hostages, and there's a deal on the table and it's agreed to in principle, and then your own government is the one that's going to kill the deal that would have gotten these hostages returned. I just can't, I'd be ready to go peacefully protest and ask very politely for my government to take a different course of action if I were in that situation. Anyway, just pretty wild.
Yeah, well, it's always interesting when you actually see the coverage from Israel, and they'll tell you storylines that we'll never see here. And so you'll see publications in Haaretz actually trashing Netanyahu, or you'll see other government officials saying that what's happening in Gaza is terrible, and this is not a way a Jewish nation is supposed to operate. So my guess is, although you might not hear that reported across our media, my guess is that the sensibilities in Israel is that there's a large demographic that upon seeing this will have your exact reaction.
Oh, yeah. It's funny. I remember when I was debating Laura Loomer about Israel Palestine shortly after October 7th. I think it was late that year, late 23, maybe early 24. We were debating the topic, and I was talking about how Netanyahu was like propping up Hamas for years, and she had never heard of this because she's an American Zionist. And so she's like, what are you talking about? And then she goes, what's your source on that? At one point, and I was like, the Times of Israel, Haaretz, and the Jerusalem Post. Like all the newspapers in Israel, they're all, this is like, there's no secret. Literally, I said to her, on October 8th, the front page of the Times of Israel was Tal Schneider's piece. Netanyahu's support for Hamas blows up in his face, or something like that was the title of the piece. And it's like, yeah, no, this is openly discussed in Israel. They talk about this shit all the time. It's widely debated and contested and all of this. But in America, it's like you're looked at like you're a conspiracy theorist or something like this. Ultimately, the New York Times and the Washington Post did end up running big pieces on this. Buying Quiet was the piece in the New York Times. But this is when we debated, it was before that piece had been written. But it's like, oh yeah, no, they talk about it over there. As I have maintained on top of everything else, I mean, obviously I am very convinced that what Israel's doing to the Palestinians is unspeakably evil. There's a video that's going super viral of a little girl burning in a fire from this week. There's been dozens of more kids have died just in the last few days over there. It's just absolutely horrible. I'm also completely convinced that it's very clearly not in America's interest to be funding and arming and supplying Israel in this effort. But I am more and more, I'm just blown away by how short-sighted and how self-destructive the Israelis are being, and and how short-sighted and self-destructive the loudest supporters of Israel are being. It just seems like all around me, I see, and sometimes right in front of me, I just see people like destroying their own reputation, their own credibility. They're, pushing people not only to the other side, but like far to the other side. I don't know if I don't think we actually talked about this on the show, but one of the craziest things I've ever seen was the response to Theo. Did you see the clip on Theo's podcast? So he just had like a moment. This is like a week ago or 2 weeks ago, maybe. But he just had a moment on his podcast. Well, first off, he's being Theo Vaughn. First off, he's the most unhateable person in America. Like, it's like impossible to hate this guy. He's just like a cool, funny guy. He's certainly never claiming to be like the guy who's read everything about this conflict. He's had people who are pro-Israel and people who are critical of Israel on his podcast. But anyway, he just had a moment where he was like, he basically was just saying, and I think he was like getting emotional as he was talking about it, but he was like, it's crazy, man. It's like we're living through a genocide in real time. And this is the type of stuff you read about in history books. And now it's like right here. And we're all just like, no matter how much we talk about it, none of us can stop it. It's just so horrible what's happening to all these little kids over there. Just like a moment like that. And then you watch like the insane Zionists on social media just trashing him. It's like it's so crazy to me that anyone's response to someone feeling bad that little children are being tortured to death and starved to death, that anybody who feels for those kids, your response to them is like, you're a bad person. Like, don't you find this insane? At the very least, wouldn't your response to them have to be like, I know, and you're right to feel this way. It is so horrible, but here's all the reasons why we just absolutely have to do this, as tragic as it is. But they don't even attack it that way. They just go like, no, you're a monster. And like, what do you think that does? Like, do you not have enough? Can you not like have enough of a moment where you could like take a look at yourself from outside yourself? Like, you could transcend the argument you're having right now and go, man, this makes my side look really bad. Like, if we have to demonize someone for having a heart, then probably that's not like a good long-term strategy. And likewise, I'm just thinking about this as I'm reading about Israel killing yet another proposed ceasefire. You're like, do you guys not worry that this might look bad? Like, does that not even enter your mind? Is there no one at the highest levels of the Israeli government who's like, hey guys, we're now like 22 months into this thing. We've completely destroyed Gaza. We're openly planning the ethnic cleansing of the entire strip. We spent 2 months allowing zero food to get into Gaza, and we're bragging about it. And now there's a proposal to have a ceasefire and return some of the hostages, and we're killing it. This might end up backfiring. Like, this might be bad for us in the long term. It is shocking to me, that there is not more awareness about this from the pro-Israel side. Like, this is one thing. And, it's like a weird dynamic because, it's like, isn't it? It's one of the, I think the art of war things is like, you don't get in the way when your enemy is making a mistake, so you're kind of like in this weird tribal game where it's like, I'm on this side and you're on this side. It's like, hey, if the other side wants to make their side look really bad, I'm not going to stop them from doing that. But I must admit, I'm truly baffled by it. I'm truly baffled by like people going like, whoa, let's pump the brakes on this, or the lack of people going, whoa, let's pump the brakes on this. This is clearly not working out well for us. As we were talking about this, I remember one of it was that man, it must have been late October, maybe November 2023, where we were doing a podcast and we were talking about exactly that. Like we were like, hey, read the room here, Israel. Like this is going to be very bad for you if you go through with this. This is almost 2 years later. And still not reading the room. It's just wild to me. Anyway, any thoughts on any of that, Rob?
I just saw this story today. Is the guy who was negotiating this the guy who got the one American out, or is it a different person?
Yes. No, it's Steve Witkoff. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I did think it was interesting that, I guess the guy who might get the ceasefire is the one that the neocons were calling an anti-Semite. But
yeah. Oh, yeah.
I guess he's still working on the case. I mean, the fact that there's any progress and an offer on the table sounds like some improvement. But it also just feels like the Israelis are looking for every excuse to not have to ramp down their operations.
Yeah. No, well, I mean, that was made pretty clear once again. All right. The other thing that we should touch on a little bit is that Donald Trump is now at the threatening Putin stage of negotiations.
But also,
He's
also cutting deals at the same time. He's doing both.
Yes, that's right. Well, this is Trump's negotiating style, right? So Donald Trump made some comments the other day about how, Putin has lost his mind and I don't know what's happened to that guy. Then today he said something about Russia, like he was like, Vladimir Putin doesn't realize how bad it would be for Russia if I wasn't here. There's like the kind of old Trump, like, oh, I got all these war hawks around me and they'd be ready to go to war, something like that. Look, like I don't really have too much to say about it. I was certainly hopeful that it would have been easier for Trump and Vladimir Putin to come to a deal here and end the war. I think there have been several obstacles to that. I think that, I think a lot of lines were crossed, and Vladimir Putin is aware of that. And he's also aware of the fact, I believe, and I've got this from some pretty good sources, and I think he's also aware of the fact that like there is the permanent government, and that it's not like he can really just make a deal with Donald Trump. Like he can make a deal with Donald Trump, but the next president could tear that up, or the permanent government could simply just not abide by it. But it does seem like one of the things that is very unfortunate in this situation is that I think Vladimir Putin, a lot of the disincentives to continue the war have been removed from Vladimir Putin. And I think at this point, he kind of views it as like, look, this is his shot. He's got all the leverage right now. There's no more, it's like he knows that the appetite for supporting this war in the West has been greatly reduced. He knows that even with more weapons shipments, it's not really making any difference on the front lines. He knows that the Ukrainian military has basically been depleted, and now is his opportunity to carve up the portion of that country that he wishes to take and to decide whether he wants to push a little bit further and give himself a little bit more of a buffer zone, which is what this whole thing was always all about. We'll see what happens. I don't put too much stake in Donald Trump putting out this threatening tweet or whatever. It's like, this is kind of just the way Donald Trump always negotiates. Hopefully we will see within the next month or two a major summit with Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, and they'll sign some type of peace deal, and we'll see an end to the killing there. I'm not sure if that is going to happen or not, though. Hopefully we see it. Any thoughts on the latest there?
It doesn't seem too promising. It seems like the minerals deal almost gives us an excuse for continuing to arm Ukraine. And I don't know that we've budgeted more funds to be sent over there, but it just seems like it's the same circular nonsense. Zelensky doesn't want to just say, hey, Putin can keep what he conquered. He wants to say, no, we refuse to possibly accept that. And so I think until Zelensky kind of comes forward and goes, hey, this thing is over and lost, Putin has no real incentive to quit punishing him. And, Donald Trump has tried to interject a couple times and go, hey, let's get this peace deal done. I think the Russians know that stalling works pretty well against Donald Trump because he has ADD and he just kind of gets annoyed and moves on to other things. And so I think they've learned that there's no reason to operate on Trump's timetables. And so I don't know. I said on the last episode, it's hard to bet against Donald Trump because you never know when he just Michael Scott's the operation, like in that episode of Chili's, and he just closes some big deal, and you're like, all right, I guess this buffoon's great. So everything about it seems like, well, he didn't end the war from day one. The fact that he's getting up there now and going, this is a different guy. The old Putin, I would have got it done. Seems like you're really walking back your position from I'll have this done by day one. I think the minerals deal was foolish because it kind of gives them an excuse to go, no, we're getting something out of this, and it kind of maybe gives Ukraine more hope or more resources, even though I don't know the specifics of money being sent over there at this time. But it does seem like it gives a platform to kind of keep us supporting Ukraine, which allows them to remain in the war. And anyways, this seems like the same thing I've been over the last couple months. It just seems like circular and that this thing's ongoing.
Yeah. And I think that, look, I agree with you. And the minerals deal was a disaster. And we said it from the beginning. I mean, you can't do that. You can't speak out of both sides of your mouth and sell it to the Ukrainians as essentially a security guarantee without the Russians hearing that too. And going like, wait a minute, well, what do you mean?
Well, I think that was kind of almost the idea. Potentially, I think the leverage play is instead of just going, hey, we're not supporting the war, it's we will continue to support the war unless you want to actually make terms and come to a peace deal. And then America going, at least we're getting something out of the security guarantee now and our willingness to continue to support them. But we're going to start taking these minerals, which, by the way, I don't know if we're ever actually going to get any minerals because it's supposed to be like it's a complicated like 10-year joint plan where the money that we spent then gets reinvested over there. And so it sounds like that's just basically payment for military gear. And then Kyle Aslan pointed out on Run Your Mouth, I had him on for this, and his prediction is basically that it's going to just be like a North Korea, South Korea situation where it'll just be a like forever militarized zone. But he also said that that the structure of the mineral deal allowed for massive scamming and that you could just basically come up with large quotes of what you think you will be able to deliver by way of minerals. And so that you get large cash payments up front from the United States of America on something that then never delivers. And 10 years from now, and speaking to your point, if you get the Warhawk administration next, they might not really care about the American first minerals actually coming to the United States of America. So once again, just a creative way to kind of fund them in the near term while pretending that it's actually in America's interests.
Yeah, it's look, dude, the situation is a mess, and this is again, none of this is good. Unfortunately, Donald Trump, as is often the case with this stuff, he just doesn't have like a guiding set of principles or a theory that he's working off of. And so he kind of jumps around to a lot of different ones. And so he will flirt with some kind of like Buchanan-esque ideas about like America first and being non-interventionist and this stuff, but then he'll jump over to like a big shiny deal. That's always, because that's really who Trump is in his heart of hearts, is like, let's build a great big building, let's make a great big deal, let's get a big beautiful bill like we were talking about on the last episode. And so he's like, while he would flirt at times with the idea of like we should just get out, then he always flirts with, but if we stay in, we could do this big, beautiful deal. I mean, look, you see it in terms of like in Gaza. And he's talking about like, the real estate we could develop there in Gaza. Like he kind of can't help but be attracted to that. But the fact is that we just need to get out of all of these different parts of the world. Like we have our own problems here. And the idea that the U.S. government, as I always love, I think it was Harry Brown who first said this, but I might be wrong about that. But I think it was Harry Brown who said, was talking about the war on drugs. And he goes, the U.S. federal government can't even keep drugs out of federal prisons, which really is something to think about. When you think about like a federal prison, you can't even keep drugs out of the most controlled, secure area. And yet you're talking about how you're going to police the entire country. Plus you're going to have the DEA going into South America and doing all this. But like on the most basic bottom line, it's like Washington, D.C. can't even control the crime problem in Washington, D.C. Like, so what are we talking about with bringing democracy to the world or whatever, or managing every conflict throughout the world? It's just the idea that we can do this is ridiculous. And in so many of these examples, particularly in Ukraine and in Gaza, the U.S. involvement has it's turned what may have been a conflict into a catastrophe. And, you can only do that for so long before you go, obviously, we got to get out of there. And I think that so much of this too, and I think this is really part of the minerals deal, or part of the mentality that goes into even wanting to go down this path, is just a basic like sunk cost fallacy. That it's like, well, look, we've put so much into this. We can't walk away now without having anything to show. But that's a basic economic fallacy. That's just not an argument. It's not an argument for continuing to dump bad money after good money after bad.
Vietnam, Iraq, Korea,
right.
Is that you can just walk away with nothing and have spent a lot of money, and the American people will move on.
I remember when I was, by the way, the Knicks are playing tonight, big game 4. I remember when I was a kid, the Knicks had so they had this one great season in 1999 where we were the 8th seed in the playoffs. So we were the last seed to make the playoffs, and then we went all the way to the finals, which I think it was the first time it had ever been done in NBA history. But it was great. It was a real fun playoff run. Great fun team to watch. And the Knicks, after this season, their front office, they gave Allen Houston, it might have been 2 years after that, but they gave Allen Houston the biggest contract in the NBA. They paid him like over $100 million. They gave him more than Kobe Bryant and Allen Iverson and like and he just was not as good as those guys. Like he was a good basketball player, but he was not as good as that. And we totally overpaid him. And then the whole team just fell apart. It didn't do good. But I remember for the next couple years when you would see like it was Ernie Grunfeld? I can't remember the guy's names, but the GM and the owner at the time, and they'd all be they'd be like, no, Allen Houston is amazing. Let me tell you something. He's as good as Kobe Bryant. This guy's going to be like unbelievable. And he wasn't like a new player. He wasn't like 2 years in the NBA. He'd been playing in the NBA for like 10 years. Like we knew who he was as a player, but you realized as you're watching them, and I remember understanding the sunk cost fallacy back then as a kid, that you realize that you're like, well, look, here's the thing, right? They can't admit that now. Or your next thing would be, well, we have to fire you then. This is insane. You gave someone this insane amount of money who wasn't worth it. But you also understand where, like, actually the correct answer is to admit it. It's not to say like, oh, well, we've spent so much that we got to keep going all in on this. It's like, no, this was a poor decision. You should reverse this decision. You should admit that this was a bad decision and not continue to make it going forward. In general, in life, that's very tricky for people to do. It's very, very tough because what happens is psychologically, you're incentivized to not admit how bad the whole thing's been. And I remember, I know I've mentioned this example before, but I remember watching that this documentary on abortion, and it was like from a pro-choice perspective, and they had this woman who was an abortionist, and she's like an older lady. She'd been an abortion doctor for like 30 years. And she's sitting there and she's going like, look, there's no moral question when it comes to abortion. It's not conscious. It's a clump of cells. It's blah, blah, blah. There's nothing wrong with having an abortion. And I remember just thinking to myself, like, yeah, you better believe that. You better really convince yourself of that, because you, of course, can't even entertain the possibility that maybe there's a moral component to this. Because if you do, oh my God, Like, Jesus Christ, like all of a sudden you become a serial murderer of babies. If that's so, like, and by the way, I'm not like you could be pro-choice or pro-life. I'm not even like saying, I'm just making the point that obviously if you're an abortion doctor and you've been performing abortions for many decades, you have to be all in on that side. And so this is what happens. Like, it's like over time, once you've gone all in on a policy, it's just like people's feet get more firmly planted in their position. And it's an unfortunate dynamic. Okay, we got to wrap up there. Go see Rob this weekend in Texas, porchtour.com. Go check out Run Your Mouth, Rob's other fantastic podcast. And of course, go to comicdavesmith.com to come see me and Robbie on the road a bunch for the rest of the year. We got dates going all the way, I think, just about to the rest of the year. And we will be adding a couple more to that soon. comicdavesmith.com, porchtour.com. Catch you guys next time. Christmas Eve, so many of you might listen to this over Christmas, or you're probably getting ready for it right now. Hope everybody has a great Christmas. We're doing something a little bit different for this episode. Of course, I have the great Scott Horton here with me. This will be our last podcast of 2025, and we've had some good ones. Another good year of podcasting. Well, I guess it's possible that some emergency happens in the next few days, and we jump on another podcast together. But probably this will be our last one for the year. And we've got something here that me and Scott had been talking about doing this episode for a few weeks. It's a little bit of a strange situation. It's a little surreal. I know it's weird these days being Scott Horton. It's weird these days being me. But so I'm going to try real quick just to set this up, because probably most people in the audience kind of know at least who the players here are and what the background is. But we also got like a bunch of new people who listen to the show over the last year, and it's grown. And so just for those people who don't know, I just kind of want to catch you up here. So as a lot of you know, I don't want to bore you guys who do know, but like, so I've been a libertarian now for almost 20 years. I was first introduced to libertarianism in 2007. I guess I started reading about it and obsessing over it that year. I think it was like 2008 I was converted. And then maybe a few years after that, maybe 2011, 2012, I think I found Scott Horton from the Tom Woods show was my first introduction. And then I found antiwar.com and got into that whole scene. And basically, from that point on, I've been like, this Scott Horton guy is the most incredible foreign policy guy in the country. I've been an evangelical of Hortonian since then. And that me and Scott became friends about 10 years ago, something like that, around 2016 or something. And then, over the last 10 years, both of our shows have grown, and our names have grown. And Scott's, of course, now coming off of a huge year. He just put out Provoked, which is his most successful book to date. And he's done big shows with Tucker Carlson and Lex Friedman and Tim Pool. And so anyway, somehow over these years, Scott has kind of taken off in popularity. I have somehow, through weird circumstance, found myself as like America's leading Hortonian or something like that, the leading face of spreading Hortonian foreign policy. And so anyway, one of the things that from the very beginning, when I first became a libertarian, I was very motivated by the anti-war cause. I was already anti-war before I was a libertarian. I just wasn't that good at it. I just got better over time. And but part of this is my age. 9/11 and the terror wars were like my coming of age story. This was the big thing that was happening as I was a young boy becoming a man. And the more I got interested in libertarianism, the more I just understood why war and peace is always the most important issue in any society. And it's not for very obvious libertarian reasons, but just to name the two big ones real quick. And the reason why I focus so much on war, the reason why Scott focuses so much on war is because, well, basically there's two reasons. Number one, first and foremost, objectively, it's the most evil thing that governments do. There's libertarians don't much like government programs, but there is no government program that robs people of life and liberty and property and just basic human decency and creates more horror scenarios than mass murder campaigns backed up by governments with taxing power and money printing power. And, so just the sheer humanitarian, cost of the whole thing. And then number two, as Murray Rothbard had written in the 1950s, that the more you study libertarianism, the more you realize that war and peace is the central question of this libertarian business, is that war is the health of the state. And nothing is a bigger indicator of our own citizens' relationship with our government and the nature of our government than war. Now, war is, by its very definition, an emergency where government, gains emergency powers. There's never been one war in the history of the world where government didn't also say we're going to need some more power than we previously had in order to fight this war. And the examples of this are endless. So anyway, I had been against the neocons and the Bush administration before I became a libertarian, but I had never really understood it until I found guys like Ron Paul, Scott Horton, Tom Woods, Justin Raimondo, and people in the anti-war libertarian kind of camp. Now, one of the guys who me and you have really been pointing to for many years is a guy named David Wormser. He is the author of the Clean Break Memo and Coping with Crumbling States. He was a very influential neoconservative. Now, this is somebody who you've talked about a lot, who I've talked about a lot. And recently, just a few weeks ago, he sat down for an interview essentially to respond to us. It was framed as like responding to me, but again, I'm a Hortonian here, so it's responding to both of us. And okay, anyway, I just want to give all this background because the first thing I got to say about this, and I'm sorry, I'll shut up and let you talk here, Scott, but there's just something surreal about the situation. Just on a personal human level, it's very weird from where we were 20 years ago to even think that we'd be in an environment here where David Wormser himself is sitting down to respond to us and nobody cares. Nobody cares. I think the interview has like a few thousand views. It has not made, I don't think I got like maybe 3 tweets came my way about this. No one So me and you were talking on the phone here and we're like, well, dude, like, we could almost just big dog this and ignore it. No one cares. No one's demanding. This isn't like the Christmas episode I'm doing because I want to get big numbers. I could just do an episode talking about Candace Owens or something like that and do way better numbers than this because it's so inside baseball. But then at the same time, we're like, well, God, I mean, we can't not respond to this. So I guess at some point, and it seemed like a good Christmas episode for kind of our people in our camp to like, this will be fun for you guys. But so what we're going to do here is we got a whole bunch of David Wormser talking, responding to us, and we're going to sit here and go through this. But I guess the first thing I would say, Scott, is isn't it just a little bit surreal to even be in this situation where David Wormser, if you went back 20 years ago or 20 plus years ago, here's a guy who like really had control over serious levers of government power. Me and you are just nobody dissidents out here. And now we're in the situation where we're actually platforming him in a sense. So I don't know. I just find this to be very amusing.
Yeah. Well, look, I am under no illusions about how big and famous and influential I am. The real story here is what a loser David Wormser is and how far he has fallen. And also, Merry Christmas. I'm going to take off my ridiculous hat now. I just had to say Merry Christmas. It's not that ridiculous. My beloved auntie made it for me. And it's very nice.
That's very sweet.
On top of this other hat, it looks kind of silly, though. But anyway, thanks for having me. And yes, I think, probably, other than Jim Loeb, although Jim Loeb is, pretty retired now and this kind of thing, but I'm probably the guy who blames Wormser the most for Rock War II because most people blame Pearl. But those two guys were joined at the hip, and where Pearl was the mentor and Wormser his underling, according to all good reporting that I've seen, Wormser actually wrote The Clean Break, wrote Coping with Crumbling States, wrote Tyranny's Ally, which Pearl wrote the foreword to, but Tyranny's Ally is the book length or kind of monograph length version of the same argument. And then and look, there's a reason, and this goes to right what you were saying. There's a reason the libertarians are the best on the warfare state and the best on the neoconservative movement, and that is this is all based in vendetta and hatred against our enemies, the neoconservatives. We are the heirs of Murray Ann Rothbard and Justin Raimondo, and so that's why we do what we do, because we hate these people and they should be destroyed.
Yeah,
and they should be destroyed. And we want other people to agree with us about how destroyed they should be.
Yeah.
That's the point.
Well, it's the thing about it is that there's this personal element to it because the neocons and the broader kind of conservatism Inc. of the day really did everything they could to ruin the lives of all of our heroes and spit on them. I quite literally spit on their graves. I mean, like William F. Buckley wrote a scathing obituary of Murray Rothbard immediately after his death, just like they were. So yes, we have a personal grudge, but then they also hijacked American foreign policy and ruined the 21st century. And so we hate them for personal reasons and for patriotic reasons. And so, yeah, it's all of that mixed together forms our, anger at these guys. I will say, we're going to start, we're going to jump into some of this right now. I will just say this. I know you were talking about this when we started, but he will remain nameless. But I had a buddy of mine who listened to this podcast, and he goes, I listened to the podcast, and I don't really follow this stuff that well or read this, but it's like, it seemed like the whole theme of the podcast was Dave Smith's wrong about all of this. And then the guy would go answer. I'd be like, it sounds like he's saying exactly what Dave said, just in different language. But anyway, so this was at the very beginning of the...
Dave,
Sure.
I know all about Wormser and the history of Iraq War II and all that, but I've not seen this interview. I did see about half of an interview he did with a different guy on a different subject, where he said a lot of interesting things that I wish I had jotted down, but what the hell? The book's already published, so I don't care. Anyway, go ahead.
But yes, that's right. We should mention that Scott is going in fresh here. I have watched this. Scott is not. I found this opening part to just be just really fun. All right, guys, let's take a moment and thank our sponsor for today's show, which is My Patriot Supply, a great company keeping Americans prepared. We're only a few weeks into winter, and it is already brutally cold, at least in my part of the country. We've had a few big snowstorms, and this is when people start worrying about what if the power goes out when it's really cold? Do you have a way to keep yourself and your family warm? Obviously, this is a real problem if you're caught in that situation, and that's why so many Americans are getting a Vesta off-grid heater from My Patriot Supply. It's a space heater that doesn't use electricity or propane. It runs on something called canned heat, which is an indoor safe fuel. With a Vesta stashed in your closet, you can keep warm no matter what. It even doubles as a stove to cook your food, which is pretty cool. And the best part is that right now, you can get the Vesta and a bunch of other preparedness gear as free gifts when you order the Winter Survival Kit from My Patriot Supply. Just go to mypatriotsupply.com/problem to see everything included. This offer is not going to last long, so definitely check it out. mypatriotsupply.com/problem. All right, let's get back into the show. Okay, so just to set this up here, they play a clip of me making arguments that I'm sure you're all very familiar with, and essentially the argument that I'm making is that that John Mearsheimer is correct to consider the neocons a core constituency of the Israel lobby. That's the most reasonable way to the lens to view them, and that the neoconservatives were a necessary part of the war effort in order for the war to happen, that this was a largely neoconservative project, the war in Iraq, that there were other people who wanted to fight it too, but it doesn't get fought without the neoconservatives. So this is essentially my argument. And here is David Wormser himself responding directly to the idea that he is a part of the Israel lobby, and that is what got us into the war in Iraq. Here's David Wormser.
First of all, we're not unconditionally committed to Israel. We're unconditionally committed to advancing American interests, which we believe are advanced by a strong Israeli-American relationship. Israel represents values, so it's not another country. It's not like Zimbabwe or Thailand. It is the cradle of Western civilization. It matters to us that the cradle of Western civilization is part of Western civilization, because ultimately the United States needs a grounding. The whole it's a story what happened ever since there's three pillars. There's Jerusalem, there's Athens, and there's Rome. And you can't uphold the foundations of that civilization that emerged from Plato to NATO, or from Abraham to now. If you remove those pillars, then you become sort of without guardrails, without anything. And then you go to certain areas that we've seen over the last century, bad places. It really grounds us. If you're within the structure of Western civilization, it does begin to bound.
Okay, just pause it right here, Natalie. I'm sorry.
So this is his response to a clip of you saying Zionism has a lot to do with why we fought the Iraq War.
Dude, this is the response to the criticism that you guys were all part of the Israel lobby and that this war was fought on behalf of Israel. And so he brings them in. And the first thing they're saying is, here, sir, here's the guy himself. He's going to slap down this nonsense. And the first thing he says is this. I could not believe this, Scott, as I'm watching it the first time. I'm going to turn this right over to you. But dude, just first of all, there is no, I mean, look, obviously, and I think this is what my buddy was referring to with this first sentence here, where he goes, it's not, Dave says we unconditionally support Israel. We're not unconditionally committed to Israel. We're unconditionally committed to U.S. interests, which are Israelis' interests because they're the cradle of Western civilization. All that. Dude, you're saying the same thing, man. You are saying the exact same thing. It's like me being like, oh, dude, you're never going to be a good husband because you're too interested in cheating on your wife. And you're like, no, I am totally committed to my marriage, which I think is benefited if I cheat on the side. And yeah, you're saying the same thing, dude. Like, what are you talking about here? And then all of this is just, I mean, Scott, the empty religiosity nothingness of all of this. It's the cradle in Greece and Rome. And, you know, if you're untethered from that, you go into bad things happen. Or like, what? Does anyone think that if we're talking about today, the sovereign debt crisis in Greece, that has anything to do with ancient Athens and our attachment to all that is democracy and Western civilization? I mean, like, what does any of this mean, dude?
Yeah, I'll let that one slide because I hope he's a little more specific about the clean break going forward here. I guess I could add here that in that other interview that I saw of him, which I hope this comes up in here a bit, you know, as we go forward. But is maybe worth mentioning here for the people, especially the young who just aren't as familiar, that in the other interview, he very much agrees with the entire differentiation of the factions inside the government and very clearly and distinctly agrees that, yeah, there's us, the neocons, and we were against, and in that separate faction against Colin Powell and his guy, Dick Armitage, and Condoleezza Rice and her guys, Robert Blackwell, Philip Zelikow, and Robert Zoellick. And those guys were all from the Brent Scowcroft Moore Council on Foreign Relations Realist School. And the neocons were the neocons. What Colin Powell told Bob Woodward in the Washington Post was a separate government set up by Dick Cheney and the boys from the think tanks, meaning the Israel lobby, the neoconservative movement. These were the guys, and Wormser absolutely agreed with, for example, mine or Mearsheimer's framing or Colin Powell's framing of the entire situation. That's exactly what it was. All right.
And what do you even want? So it's like, it gets into a thing where you're almost like, is the whole battle here semantics then? Like, okay, so how about this? How about I don't call it the Israel lobby anymore. I call it the group of people who believe Israel is the cradle of Western civilization and must be supported at all times and is always in America's interest to support it. Like, okay, so you guys, so then the group, what you just said, David Wormser, that's who I'm blaming. Those people. Like, what are we talking about here?
Trotsky, Strauss, and the neocons. As Justin put it.
Right.
Go ahead.
Yeah. All right, let's keep playing.
Ultimately to that. For example, where do we get, we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. Those rights ultimately emerge at Mount Moriah with the near sacrifice of Isaac, when it was established that the human life of Isaac, even, remember, you have to understand, in society of the Middle East at the time of Abraham, parents who didn't like their children, who didn't have a child that they wished, a girl if they wanted a boy if they wanted a girl, they could kill them. It was very tribal. It was very dangerous in that sense. This established that human life is inalienable. It's given by God, taken by God, and not by other men. And that is the foundation of Western society. Then you go to Mount Sinai. At Mount Sinai, it's when you took a tribal structure, 12 tribes, and through a constitution, the Torah, you forged the first modern nation. So both the concept of community and nation, individual rights, all emerge from the foundations of the Bible in that sense, from a cultural point of view, if not a religious point of view. By the way, it's something that keeps bubbling through up until this age. Dostoevsky, when he wrote a book called The Devils, or Biesti, he wrote how he really described Lenin except it was 50 years
All right,
before Lenin.
just pause it for a second. I'm
And
so
in
sorry.
it,
It's just it does feel like someone should just interrupt and go, "Sir, the question was, are you a part of the Israel lobby who lied us into war?" I'm sorry, you're off on Dostoevsky here. Like you're just kind of. And also, look, I'm not here to attack the Torah or Judaism or whoever wants to make their arguments about what was the origin of Western civilization. We could sit here for fucking, and actually, like, it's a really interesting conversation. We could sit for 20 hours and talk about where the real understanding of property rights or individual justice came from. But like, if you want to take this Old Testament, Torah, Judeo-Christian overarching worldview, there is an argument for some of that. So, has nothing to do with what we're talking about. Absolutely nothing to do with any of that. And nobody thinks like, I don't know, like this is on the level, Scott, if you started talking about like the attack on our, we had a couple soldiers killed in Syria a few days ago. And I started talking to you about like ancient Sumar and what that cultural impact. And by the way, I think that's where, to the best of our knowledge, where we got mathematics from, where we got the concept of like, medicine, the concept of mathematics, astronomy, like so many things go back to ancient Sumar, which I think was either Iraq or Syria, something like that. But if you were like talking about the government of that today, and I just started making this one-to-one connection, you'd be like, Dave, I'm sorry, dude, like, did someone slip acid in your coffee this morning? Like, what are you talking about? This has nothing to do with anything.
Or are you just avoiding the question?
Yeah, right. Yeah, like what the fuck?
So now listen, I mean, this is, I guess my fault or yours, that we should have had some timestamps here to get to the meat of this thing. You want to kind of try to page through ahead and see if we can get to where he finally does say anything of substance? Because I want to hear about the clean break and stuff, right?
He does get asked more specifically about the clean break. Yeah, let's skip forward like a couple minutes here and see where we are.
Out the air defense structures that Israel had, with lots of Saudis and others killed, and maybe American servicemen all over the place in Iraq. And then in the end, hopefully, we would have achieved what the Israelis achieved. And that then tells you right there that the Israelis essentially saved us an awful lot of work, an awful lot of risk, and potentially an awful lot of damage to ourselves. And that's a good example. The other thing is nobody's really looking at what Israel did. I mean, it did to Hezbollah, it wasn't just decapitation. Somehow they got into the command structure and took it over. And
let's fast forward. We can argue about the Gaza war, but let's find him talking about Iraq in the 90s and 2000s here. If we can.
Yeah, it should be coming up pretty soon, I think.
Period, which I was working for. They grew up in the shadow of World War II. They knew what that argument, it's over there, it's not our problem. They knew where that leads. They wound up having to fight not one, but two great wars, the World War II and the Cold War, precisely because over there came over here.
Man, the guy
over there mattered.
Must have really
young Americans,
man. What?
Also,
in the interview that I saw, the guy was asking him substantive things, and he was responding to those.
Yeah.
This is all over the place.
Yeah, but he does come back soon to the clean break, so you'll get your chance to get into all this stuff. Here, let him go for a little bit.
Very impatient guy with these neocons, Dave Smith. Go ahead.
Fully appreciate how much the strategic architecture of the world is anchored to American power.
That's right.
And that their way of life is anchored to that strategic architecture. They will not have the sort of freedoms, the sort of wellness and well-being, wealth, all these things that we take for granted. The idea that you can just get on a plane and you can fly to Japan. These things are very much anchored to a world that American power built. Fighting the Cold War and fighting World War II. And that's what's threatened if America withdraws from the world. But right now, we know the cost. The cost was very painful and obvious in a place like Iraq.
It is, but just pause real quick
obvious.
Because we're gonna, and I think we're gonna get into some more interesting substantive stuff here. But it is just worth pointing out that like it is amazing how much these war hawks always rely on these wild assertions that like it becomes super vague. Like, you know, like the more specific you get, like where you're like, hey, you made this claim about Iraq, that was a lie, you destroyed the place, 1 million people are killed, 9 million people are displaced, 30,000 of our boys committed suicide in the wake of the thing, and it cost trillions of dollars. And then they go, American might is why you can drink a coffee in the morning.
Yeah. And take an airplane to Japan and back.
I mean, you just rely on the fact that, you know, if you get strep throat, you could go get amoxicillin, man, and be better in a few days. Like, what? Like, what are you? I'm sorry, son. You're going to have to make that connection a little bit clear and actually put an argument before what, like, your argument is if we hadn't fought World War II or the Cold War, airplanes wouldn't exist. Like, what? What the fuck are you talking about here, dude? Anyway, let's just keep playing. Just so you see, the neocons always like, in very softball interviews, they're always able to convince some percentage of people that they're smart and they're saying intelligent things. It's always just vague nothingness.
Hey, man, on that document that I sent you that had the questions, aren't there timestamps on there?
You know what? Let me take a look at that real quick. Sorry, guys. I did this. I will take responsibility for this one because I thought this was a little bit more into
it's
clips.
A terrible interview, but that's not your fault.
Well, that part isn't my fault. Other aspects might be. Oh, hold on.
Yeah, not having the timestamps ready might be one.
Yeah, that might be on me. Shit,
especially when he is so bad at this. You know what I mean? All right. Well, look, while you're looking for timestamps, I'll just explain real quick that the point of the clean break is what Wormser called the Jordan option or the Hashemite option for Iraq, which said that, oh no, we're worried that Syria and Iran might gang up and take over Iraq. So we want to gang up with Jordan and Turkey, and especially Jordan, and take over Iraq instead. And the magical, ridiculous, wrong thinking in there was that if the Jordanians had dominance in Iraq, that the Iraqi Shiite supermajority would do what they said. And for fanciful reasons of the Hashemite king's supposed, hypnotic power over the Iraqi Shiites. But that was a scam and peddled to them by Iraqi exiles. And the neocons are stupid as they are evil. And they bought it and they believed in it. And that was the policy they went with. Now, eventually, they switched out the Hashemite king, who they didn't have because the king of Jordan had died and his son came in and wasn't into it, whatever, that part became untenable. And it was all in the name of democracy. So now you're going to install a monarchy and stuff. So they decided the guy who was peddling them that the same lies that this would work, Ahmed Chalabi, the leader of the exiles, they just put him in power. And then he would make sure that the Iraqi Shiites.
And what was his group called? The Free Iraqi Congress or something like that? What was
the Iraqi National Congress, the INC.
The Iraqi National, right. Because that was.
These are the same guys who, furnished many of the lies about the warehouses full of chemical and biological weapons, about the anthrax program, biological weapons laboratories, ongoing nuclear program. All of that stuff was coming from them. And so that was a huge part of it. And the neocons essentially were suckers for this guy Chalabi's lies about how the new supermajority Shiite Iraq after Saddam would be their cat's paw, and which of course did not work out at all. But that was the thinking behind the clean break, if you read it.
Okay.
And it's silly. If you look at a map of the Middle East in your head or on a page, you'll think, well, that doesn't make much sense. Why would you want to get rid of Sunni Saddam if your worry is that Iran arms Hezbollah by way of Syria? Seems like Saddam is a roadblock in the Ayatollah's agenda there. You would be right, and Wormser would be a fool. But anyway, please do go ahead.
There. Okay, perfect. Now, by the way, I should, and that was great and very important for people to understand. But I did find, yes, your guy did send me the timestamps here. I was confused about this, so don't worry. This will go a lot smoother going forward here now. Natalie, what time are we at here in the video? Like, what time were we just watching from? We were at 13:24. Okay. So actually, he's already been asked about the clean break here.
Oh, you just never answer it at all?
No, but he's gonna get into it because he gets asked about it again. So you know what? Let's play from here. I think he's about to get into some stuff, but if not, I got more timestamps there now.
Not to do things like that. Now, I'm not saying that necessarily was the right thing to do or not the right way to do it, maybe, but the idea that you can just ignore these threats, we will find how quickly our youth will have to pay the price of that. That's another issue about strategic importance. After World War II, we sat down and we wrote a document called NSC 68, 1948, which outlined our strategy in the world. And it started with there are several critical industrial areas of the world that if they fall to the Soviet Union, we can't defend ourselves properly, steel production, et cetera, industrial production. If you update that, high-tech centers are the new Roarland, the new Japan industrial infrastructure, et cetera. And Israel is at the epicenter. I mean, it has as many patents as Europe. I mean, in other words, if you're out to construct a new NSC 68, the industrial capacity of Israel in terms of innovation and high-tech culture is a critical American value in and of itself. After Oslo, but you had pretty major conflict on the border of Lebanon, and you had the first of really serious waves of terrorism and even kidnapping in 95, 96 in Israel as a result of Oslo. Right. It wasn't even through a military intervention by us. It was the idea that you would build an exile army that would do it itself. Namely, Iraqis would fight to liberate Iraq. You know, if you take the context of this, the first thing is, what can people in the region do to get things done for themselves and that help our strategic interests? The clean break is the inversion of what it's portrayed. It's portrayed as a master plan to finagle the United States to fight everybody's wars in the region, whether it's Israel's wars or Ahmed Chalabi, who was this Iraqi guy who led an Iraqi opposition, the Iraqi National Congress, which was in northern Iraq.
He turned out to be a shady character.
Yeah, I mean, he's a complex character, but we can get into that. But the bottom line is the whole
all right, let's pause it right here for a
break
second. Let's pause it right here. Sorry. All right. No, so I did my best because I don't really wish to engage with the host of this, but whatever. Okay, he made an appearance. But so this okay. So I want to almost like go out of my way to be as fair as I can here, as charitable as possible to David Wormser, because there might be a kernel of truth to one point that he made there. But I think there's I was blown away. The part where he starts going into here, which we're about to play about Chalabi, well, he's complicated. Like, whoa, he still defends this. Crazy, which is wild. But I think in a way there, you kind of got ahead of this and almost gave part of this response just now when we were trying to find this timestamp. But so if David Wormser, if he's saying that, hey, look, I bring up, let's say when I go on Rogan or Tucker or a lot of these shows, and I'll bring up the clean break and I'll go, look, everybody can go read the clean break for themselves. And what was it all about? They were saying, well, here's the thing. We need a break from the peace process from Oslo. As you can see here, he's blaming Oslo with all of the problems that are in the region as a result of it, which is, not correct, but whatever. But we got to get rid of Oslo. The whole idea of Oslo was this land for peace nonsense, where you will give the Palestinians their land and then they'll promise to be peaceful with us. Get away from that. And instead, what we got to not give them land. And instead, we got to focus on the surrounding states that are problems for the Israelis because they back up the Palestinians or whatever. And now, obviously, this, as you just laid out, this whole plan that was sold to them by Chalabi, that you could install a Hashemite and the Shiites of Iraq would have to listen to them, and then they would tell the other Shiites to knock it off and not be friends with Hezbollah or whatever. This whole plan, like, okay, it is maybe true that when I say it like that on those shows, what people might be inferring from that is like, oh, so you're saying that the plan was what it became, in a sense, that like America would intervene and fight these wars or something. But like, okay, it's true what David Wormser is saying, that like that part wasn't written in the clean break. That's not right. Okay, fair enough. But the point, Scott, is obviously that like, yeah, but the war in Iraq ended up happening. And when it ended up happening, it was America who went in and fought it. It was our country who had to pay for it. And it was led by the same guys under the same belief as the clean break strategy. Like, this was the nugget of the whole thing. And this was the thinking in Washington.
Yeah, look, and I urge people to read. They're both available at scotthorton.org, and you can find them other places too, but you can read A Clean Break and Coping with Crumbling States. And it's in Coping, I believe, where he says, it's in Coping, where he recognizes that there be a contest for influence over the Iraqi Shia. And if the Iranians won it, it would be bad times, and that the Iraqi Sunnis are afraid that they would be subject to retribution after losing the power and being an ethnic minority there and all that, or sectarian minority there, and all of that. So they actually acknowledge the danger, and then they go ahead and do it anyway. And the thing of it is, just like, as you said in your introduction there, the Mearsheimer-Walt case in the Israel lobby and American foreign policy is, yeah, of course W. Bush was driving. But the thing is, Wolfowitz was in the back seat going, trust me, you're doing the right thing here, boss. Me and my friends, we all game this out, and we know that you're smart, and this is what we want to do. So instead of saying, this whole thing about the Iraqi Shiite supermajority is going to be under the command of Ayatollah Sistani in alliance with the Ayatollah Khamenei. This whole thing is going to blow up in our goddamn face. We should not do this. Instead, they were saying, no, trust us. Chalabi says that the Iraqi Shiites will be compliant. They'll be allies with Israel. They'll force Hezbollah to stop being friends with Iran. They will break the chain of Iranian arms to Hezbollah through Syria, which was already broken by Saddam. But anyway, and they believe this pile of lies. That was what it was. And so if they had been, if all of Cheney's eggheads had told W. Bush, sir, we really want to do this, but remember how your father abandoned the Shiite uprising in 1991 and let Saddam kill them all? Well, that's because Iran would have taken over the country, see? And the same thing is true here. If we do this now, Iran is going to take Baghdad, and you're going to be the Ayatollah's, partner in this crime. They didn't say that. They said, it's going to be great, boss. We got to do it. We got to go all the way to Baghdad. Then we will be there and we will tell them all what to do. And it'll all work out just like in our dreams, just like Chalabi promised. And they'll build an oil pipeline to Haifa.
All right, guys, let's take a moment and thank our sponsor for today's show, which is Proton Drive. If you're tired of big tech snooping through your files, switch to Proton Drive. It's end-to-end encrypted cloud storage trusted by over 100 million people worldwide, so only you can access your photos, work, and personal files. It's free to sign up, and it supports our show when you do it. From photos to docs to creative projects, Proton Drive keeps everything safe with end-to-end encryption, no ads, no AI training, no data leaks. And the best part, as I mentioned, it's free to start, and you can sign up using our link. Our link is proton.me/Dave Smith. That's proton.me/Dave Smith. All right, let's get back into the show. Yeah, dude, like I say, one of the things that was really revealing to me, that I learned about watching this David Wormser interview, or at least I believe, making guesses on what's really in someone's heart or something like that. But I remember, and this was up until after the first time I read Enough Already. It might have been like an advanced copy of Enough Already, but it was a physical copy, not reading it on a PDF that you sent me. Like, you had the book out. And I remember, and I've had many conversations with you on the phone about this, and probably on podcast too. It was the one Hortonian piece that always really threw me for a loop. I was always like, Scott, you always write it as if these neocons really believed Chalabi. But that can't be right. It would just never made sense to me. I was always like, dude, obvious, anyone would know that fucking Iran was going to gain influence if you overthrew Saddam Hussein. No one could possibly have believed that, even what you're saying there, even if he admitted in coping with crumbling states that there is a chance it could be this other. No one would even think your thing is a 1% at best chance. And the overwhelming odds are just no, if you install the Shiite majority, they will be more friendly to their Shiite neighbors than the Sunnis who hated their guts would be. And I guess on some level, I was always I think they were just looking for someone to say this, and they found a guy who could say it, and that was their justification for the war. And they figured we'd topple Iran next anyway, so it doesn't really matter anyway. And I guess it just took me a while to almost appreciate that. No, I think David Wormser really did believe him, and part of that is just maybe the human psychology of it. Governments, they end up looking for somebody to tell them what they already want to hear. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean they can't be convinced by that person who's telling them what they wanted to hear.
Hey, look, one of my first articles I wrote for antiwar.com was after the Downing Street memo came out, and it was called, "I'm here for my bill of goods." Right? In that saying, somebody sold somebody a bill of goods.
Right.
It was yeah, that's why I'm here. If you got to torture it out of some guy, tell me some sweet lies I need to tell these other people so we can do our evil thing we want to do. That was the entire program. And let me just say real quick, because I have it right in front of me here. I have just a few choice quotes. It's the only thing I'm going to read to y'all today. But this is from Mark Zell, and you can follow him on Twitter. You can follow Wormser on Twitter too. This is from Mark Zell, who was Douglas Feith's law partner. And Feith was one of the other signers of the clean break.
The clean break moment, yeah.
Pearl and Wormser. And he says, Ahmed Chalabi is a treacherous, spineless turncoat. He had one set of friends before he was in power, and now he's got another. And by the way, so Zell is an attorney in Jerusalem who represents settlers on the West Bank. That's Doug Feith's law partner there.
Mm-hmm.
He said he would end Iraq's boycott of trade with Israel and would allow Israeli companies to do business there. He said the new Iraqi government would agree to rebuild the pipeline from Mosul to Haifa. But Chalabi, Zell says, has delivered on none of these. And he goes on complaining. I have one more thing here. So this quote is not Zell. This is from, and again, let me say this. Sorry, I need a disclaimer here. The guy that wrote this article, his name is John Dizard, and he's a serious journalist from the Financial Times. I admit, yes, it's true. This article appears at salon.com. However, it was not then what it is now. It was basically just like Slate. It was like center-left liberal stuff, and they printed actual journalism. Now I know it's the wokest, silliest thing or whatever.
This was a decade before they went insane, yeah.
Literally from 21 years ago, okay? And it's a solid piece, and John Dizard is a solid guy, okay? So don't let the URL give you the cooties and freak out, okay? But now, so here's the thing. Here he is, oh, I'm sorry. He quotes here the Jerusalem Post speculating that Chalabi was just scamming the neocons 2 weeks before the war was launched. I had missed that one. I like that. But then, so check this out. This is John Dizard writing, okay? He says, Chalabi's Arab admirers say they knew he'd never make good on his promises to be allies with Israel. Quote, now this is Dizard quoting another guy. I was worried that he was going to do business with the Zionists, confesses Maad Assad, the managing director of a bank in Jordan, one of his business partners. Quote, he told me not to worry, that he just needed the Jews in order to get what he wanted from Washington, and that he would turn on them after that. End quote. There you go. So that's how stupid David Wormser is he got screwed by the Ayatollah Khamenei right in the face. Oh, so in fact, just from what I heard, Chalabi was literally fucking Harold Road, but hey.
Well, and also, by the way, Chalabi also, I believe, was one of Judith Miller's main sources in the New York Times as she was writing the articles to sell the whole thing too. So, right, and Michael Gordon. And so, just so people are keeping up here, because I don't want people to get lost if some of you are. So Chalabi is an Iraqi, what's the word I'm looking for? He's kicked out of the country, exile, sorry. Yeah. So he's an Iraqi exile who had real beef with Saddam Hussein for many, many years. And so what Wormser is saying here, where he's like, no, look, dude, the clean break wasn't a call for America to go overthrow these countries on behalf of Israel. The idea was that, whatever, people in DC and people in Tel Aviv would work together to help Iraqis to overthrow Saddam Hussein, right?
And meaning so, Chalabi and his buddies, right?
Chalabi
and then they abandoned that policy, but it's of course this exact same thinking behind the war itself.
Exactly. And so the point here is that they're sitting here and saying, oh, no, it wasn't that the clean break was a strategy for the U.S. to fight all these wars. And no, it's not that we're the Israel lobby. We just recognize Israel's the cradle of Western civilization and the greatest thing ever, and we always have to work with them. And here was the plan, and here's how it could have worked. But the point we're making here is that, like, look, we get it. In the same way that the government finds an intellectual who says, I have an argument that the government needs more power. And then they go, we're very persuaded by this intellectual's argument. Like, come here, but it's just, they need. So he found an exile who would tell him what he wanted to hear. And then, yes, ultimately then after 9/11, they used the same framework while engaging. But why is it, like, whittle this down. Why is it that we use this framework after 9/11? Why is it that you wrote the clean break to begin with? Why is it that you wanted to listen to Chalabi? Why is it that you even cared about an exile? It's Oh, yeah, because it was good for Israel. That's why the clean break was written to Benjamin Netanyahu. What is this? This isn't rocket science. You wrote it to the prime minister of Israel when he first came into power, the one who's now the longest serving prime minister in Israeli history. Well, this was his first year of coming into power, and this is what you wrote to him. You care about this because of Israeli goals. Like, that's the whole point here. And so anyway, he's just not touching any of that, which is really what you...
And it goes back to his very first answer.
To your point.
Just real quick,
I'm sorry.
It goes back to his first answer that, look,
ahead.
America's interests and Israel's interests are the exact same thing. So I don't even know what you're talking about, Dave. What's the difference at all?
Yeah. But just imagine, I mean, dude, look, I'm sorry. It's hard to not keep ranting on this, but just to so everybody's like clear on the point here. So the quotes Scott's reading from, yes, those aren't quotes from David Wormser. They're quotes from the law partner of his close associate. Oh, all right, fine. Like, but at this point, like, the point is that guy's just saying the quiet part out loud. That, like, yeah, the whole reason we wanted to buy what Chalabi was saying, the whole reason we wanted to believe in this whole thing is because then they'd do business with Israel. That then this is the clean break strategy. Yes, that's the whole point. You wrote this shit down, motherfucker. It's not like I'm sitting here and arguing that you said something that you did. You published it. We can all read it. It's still on the internet. You're talking about the document right now. You wanted, because you didn't want to have to do a two-state solution, as the entire world and the Israeli government had already capitulated to, at least verbally, that we got to give these Palestinians a state at some point. And you were like, no, we don't want to do that. But how the hell do you not do that? Well, the only way to not do that is to try to overthrow all of the regimes in the region who are a threat to Israel. And ultimately, when it came to fruition, that meant the U.S. doing it. You know, like if they want to really argue on the point, which this is where I was saying I think they have a kernel of truth to, that, like, hey, Dave, we didn't explicitly say that the plan here was for the U.S. to sacrifice their blood and treasure and for them to do all the heavy lifting. But at the same time, man, this just reminds me of like the 12-day war all over again, where people go, well, what's the problem if Israel wanted to do this without America? Well, that's not the world we're living in, dude. They're not doing this without America. Because guess what? They can't. Because, like, if Israel tried to do the 12-day war without America, well, first off, they don't have those bunker busters, so they don't get to do those attacks. And second off, what do those rocket responses look like? What do those missile responses look like without America defending Israel? Right. Oh, it's a whole different thing now, isn't it? And so, like, anyway.
It's worth mentioning here, too, real quick, that it ain't just Wormser and Pearl, right? There is about a dozen or 20 of these guys inside the W. Bush government at the deputy and undersecretary level and all of that. So you had, Libby and Hannah and as John Scooter Libby, John Hannah, Robert Joseph in Eric Edelman in the vice president's office. You had Elliot Abrams on the National Security Council. Karen Kotowski said when Abrams got the job on the NSC, all the boys in the Pentagon were whooping and hollering, we got him in, we got him in. And then you had on the Defense Policy Board at the Pentagon, you had Pearl, Gene Kirkpatrick, Kenneth Edelman, James Woolsey, and all of those guys. And then, of course, Paul Wolfowitz was Deputy Secretary of Defense. Under him was Douglas Feith as Deputy Secretary of Defense for Policy, and Stephen Cambone, Deputy Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, all neoconservatives. And then under Feith was Abram Shulsky and Bill Lutey, neoconservatives who ran the Office of Special Plans, with Michael Makovsky and Michael Ledeen and Michael Rubin and not all named Michael, but many other neoconservatives. And then across the hall was the Policy Counterterrorism Evaluation Group, which was set up by Wormser with Michael Malouf. And their main job was coming up with lies about Saddam Hussein's ties to al-Qaeda, including and especially that Mohammed Atta met with Abu Ani, the deputy foreign minister of Iraq, in Prague in the Czech Republic. And according at least to the original version by Israeli intelligence in the Bild, Dave, and you can still read this to this day in the Los Angeles Times, gave him a flask of anthrax too, right? When the Iraqis, meeting with the head hijacker of September 11th, supposedly, that was one of their main talking points that Wormser and Malouf at the PTEG had pushed. And so these were the neocons.
Which was completely made up, to be clear.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Literally none of it happened at all.
Right. Oh, and I forgot to mention that. So, and then Wormser went from the Pentagon to state, where he worked with John Bolton to keep the leash on Dick Armitage and Colin Powell. And then he went to work in the vice president's office. So Wormser was, and he also put Harold Rode in charge of the Office of Net Assessment at the Pentagon as well. And where he kicked all the Arabists out and all that kind of thing. So this was the neocon network. This was the separate government. This is why Seymour Hersh was able to say, oh, come on, it was a coup. 9 people took over the government. Or Thomas L. Friedman, who is a pro-war Zionist, but not a neoconservative. He had said in an interview with Haaretz that like this war was the project of, I think he said 15 guys, and they all live within, all their offices are within 1.5 miles of here in Washington, D.C. This was their project. They had wanted to go to Iraq for a long time. They took advantage of September 11th and they got away with it. And they're the ones who did it all right. And like, yeah, what can you say?
Yeah.
These are the guys. Even Colin Powell says, and he did their dirty work. We all know he went to the UN and told their lies, but still, that was what was going on here. No question.
It does feel a lot like that interview that.
I left out Hadley on the NSC. Sorry.
Yeah, it feels a lot like that interview where Fauci said in like 2023 that he never recommended to lock anything down, and you're like, dude, you know, we remember, right?
Khalilzad on the NSC as well. Sorry, now I'm done.
Okay, here, let's keep playing some more Wormser, because I think he's getting into more Chalabi talk here.
Which is, how can we get people in the region finally to do things in order to relieve us of having to do it ourselves? Israel was a particular frustration for us because we knew that Israel, as an American, we understood Israel was beginning to enter a period where it was becoming a regional power. Mm-hmm. And the Israelis were still stuck in a sort of a diaspora mindset, which is everything is just good enough. Everything is, we just protect ourselves, we secure ourselves, et cetera. They weren't thinking in terms of what they had become. Mm-hmm. They were still thinking the way they thought in 1948, which is, let's just plant ourselves, get ourselves set up, protect ourselves, and survive.
Yeah, let's pause it for a second, because I mean, look, dude, it's just such a twisted way to do it. Because yeah, the Israelis had this fucking mentality at the time that like, I don't know, maybe we should just make a deal and have a 2-state solution, and like we could just kind of be protected. Like we're more than capable of being in a situation here where we can protect ourselves. Thinking about where Israel was in the early 1990s, the mid 1990s, and we're more than, we're a nuclear armed country. We have the most powerful military in the region. Like maybe we don't need to permanently occupy our neighbors, and we
not good enough.
And then he's going, no, dude, you guys got all the wrong mentality here. You see, you're a power. And what does that mean? You're a power. That means you can abuse other people. You don't have to stop doing that and just worry about protecting yourself. I mean, he's just saying that in different words. I don't know. They try to like,
again, as you mentioned, this clean break strategy was written for incoming Prime Minister Netanyahu in 96, when right after Netanyahu fan had murdered Rabin, and then the kind of short-term caretaker presidency of Shimon Peres after that. And so the 2-state solution was dead. Oslo was dead then. And of course, Netanyahu was a very willing recipient of this message from Wormser that you don't have to do this Rabin stuff, especially now that Rabin's dead and gone and you're the guy in there. And we all know from the history of the rest of the 1990s that Netanyahu was absolutely opposed to a 2-state solution, did everything he could to sabotage it, is caught on film he thought the camera was off, and on a secret recording admits how he used and abused and lied to Bill Clinton and pretended he was going along with the deal when in fact, Area C is 2/3 of the whole West Bank, jerk. I won, you lose.
That's exactly right. And that's worth it for anyone if you haven't seen that to go read. All you got to do is like secret recording of Netanyahu. It's all over the place. And I think, one of the other things that really should be stressed there, because I think sometimes when you say a Netanyahu fan killed Yitzhak Rabin, it almost sounds like, so what are you saying? Like he's guilty just because someone who likes him, but like, just to be clear here, make of this what you will. To this day, Yitzhak Rabin's wife blames Benjamin Netanyahu for the murder of Yitzhak Rabin. He was, we may think here that political rhetoric is out of control or something like that. Or is that, dude, they were holding marches. I was shocked when I first saw this. They were holding marches. Benjamin Netanyahu and the right-wingers in Israel were furious with Yitzhak Rabin because he had agreed to the Oslo Accords, and he had finally said, like, okay, we got a promise to give the Palestinians a state. You know, at this point, again, this is the early 1990s. The occupation's been going on since 1967. It was already pretty long. He was like, dude, we got to let go of this. Like, it's just too much, and not in quite as much of a hippie-ish way as people would think, more in a nationalist, like, this is costing us too much. And I don't think he ever
in a half-ass way too. It wasn't a real state.
No, it wasn't
a hell of a lot better than what anyone had in mind since then is all.
Exactly. Yes, that's exactly right. But so Benjamin Netanyahu, in leading these vicious, like, anti-Yitzhak Rabin protests, they carried around a casket with Yitzhak Rabin's name on it. Like, they carried around his casket while he's still alive, like as some type of gesture of, like, dude, like, you know, I don't know, walking right up to the line of incitement to violence. There was, like, all types of crazy shit like that. And then, then Benjamin Netanyahu fan murdered the Jewish prime minister of Israel for the crime of wanting to make peace with the Palestinians, of publicly saying that he wanted to take their boot off their neck. Anyways, just to watch Wormser paint this, you know, in his light is truly sickening. But here, let's keep playing, because I think there'll be something of substance coming up.
They had moved from survival to a regional power, and they didn't realize it. And the whole point of this thing was to tell the Israelis, no, you're becoming a regional power. That makes you far more useful for the United States than all these other. I mean, we talked about the cultural foundations. Israel always in the 80s said, 70s and 80s said, oh, we're the unsinkable aircraft carrier of the United States. You know, and all on, and second, and that Israel is important for it. The truth is, Israel could have disappeared in the 70s. It would have been a human tragedy, but it wouldn't have been a strategic disaster for the United States. It would have helped the Soviet Union in the Cold War. Very true. But in the 50s, and so it wasn't so clear. By the 80s, Israel had become such a strategic powerhouse, 90s, such a powerhouse already, but it didn't realize it. And it had great assets that could contribute to the overall Western defense in the region and Western interests. So this letter to Prime Minister Netanyahu had just been elected the week before. That was the purpose of writing this, is to say, look, you've lived in America. You're very American. You get us. Now think like us. Be an American. Don't, think like part of the Western alliance. This is what you can do.
Think about shape your universe.
Shape your universe. Shape your environment that helps all of us. Mm-hmm. And then Iraq, the whole Hashemite thing you described. Remember, Shiites believe their leader descends from the bloodline of the prophet. They don't have.
Oh man, no.
Keep playing.
In Sunni Islam, there's caliphs who, goes this way, that way, all sorts of different directions, but they're not the bloodline of the prophet. Shiites were the bloodline of the prophet. They come from Ali, who was the nephew of the prophet, and direct son, a dynasty. And then the last one sort of occulted, disappeared, but will come back in their view. That means Shiites venerate any descendant of the prophet. The Hashemites are the family of the prophet. That's why the British and Lady Gertrude Bell was so intent on helping the Hashemites take over Iraq in 1922, because she understood the Shiites, which were a headache already back then for the British, the Shiites would have to venerate him. They would have to accept him as their leader.
Can you, okay, so pause it
how
here
did
for a
that work
second.
out, dude?
He's still, so
That
can
is
I just
so
ask,
funny.
Scott,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Maybe this really might be my ignorance speaking here, okay? But if this is correct, if what David Wormser is saying is correct, then why the need to install a Hashemite in Iraq at all? Why can't, like, the king of Jordan just say, hey, knock it off? If you're saying that this is a religious obligation that they have, then why would that be changed by matters of mere politics? Like, why can't the Hashemite king just command the Shiites of Iraq to be friends with Israel?
Right. Why can't King Abdullah right now just say, Iraqi Shiites, make me your king, and then be the king of Jordan and Iraq right this minute? Knock
Or
it
even
off
if he doesn't have to be the
completely
king.
drive Iran's friends out of power and take over
Or
Baghdad.
just go,
What's he waiting for?
like, why did we have to overthrow Bashar al-Assad? Why couldn't he have just said, hey, stop. You stop being nice to Hezbollah now. Like, why? None of this makes any sense at all. And yes, like, it's amazing, dude. 20 plus years later, he's still defending this shit.
Yeah. So here's the thing about it. Yeah, he's completely wrong, of course, right? When the Hashemites, essentially, they're from the Arabian Peninsula, but the Al Saud family won out, and the British installed them in Arabia, and then they put the Hashemites in Jordan and Iraq. And the Hashemites, had power there for, backed by British force for about 30 years, but they were overthrown mostly by the Shiites. And overall, the Iraqi Shiites had a religious edict, a fatwa, against any cooperation with the Hashemite king. And in fact, Chalabi's family was one of the few Shiite families that violated that fatwa and worked with the Hashemites anyway. So you could see how he had a narrative to sell to David Wormser later. But just on the bold face of it, as anyone could tell you on an 8th grade level, the Hashemites are Sunnis. And there's nothing in the Shiite faith that says anyone who claims to have the blood of the prophet, whether they went off with the founders of the Shiite faction back in the 1300s or whatever it was, that the Sunnis would be able to control them. Sorry, I lost my train of thought on that. Anyway, point being that that was never the case in history. And then, as you were trying to say there before I crudely interrupted you, was, well, how did it work out this time around? Right? They did the clean break. They invaded and toppled the country. Chalabi was a treacherous, spineless turncoat, according to their guys. And Jordan has no influence in Iraq and never had influence through all of Iraq War II. And look, when I say that he warned in Coping about the dangers of pro-Iranian Shiites taking power, he names the Hakim family and the Supreme Council for Islamic Revolution in Iraq. He calls them the Supreme Association or whatever, same thing. Well, these are the guys who were the Ayatollah of Iran, the Ayatollah Khamenei's cat's paws. They were the ones who had chosen Iran's side in the Iran-Iraq war and had lived in Iran for 20 years. They were the ones who had their Bada Brigade were the ones who had begun to lead the Shiite uprising of 91, causing Bush Sr. to betray it. And these are the guys who took power in the war. So here, this guy was Cheney's Middle East advisor through 2008. I don't think he left the government. Maybe he left in like 07 or something, but he was in the government. He was not when some of the neocons were fired. Wormser was not. So he sat there and he watched the same Iraq War II that you and I watched, where it was Skiri and Dawa, and in third place, Muqtada al-Sadr, who won. Not any Shiites loyal to the Hashemite royalty in Jordan. Has anyone listening to this or watching this ever heard of Jordan dominance in Iraq since 2003? Even in a remark by anyone ever in any context? No. And then so here he is in 2025 going, yeah, see, no, I still believe exactly what I was told, obviously falsely, in 1996, and the entire history of Iraq War II, and hell, for that matter, Iraq War III, in the meantime, notwithstanding. Who won Iraq War III? When Obama built the caliphate in Syria, it was the Iranian Quds Force that came across the border to lead the Iraqi Shiite militias with American planes flying as their air power as they liberated Tikrit, Saddam's hometown, from the bin Ladenite caliphate.
You know, so many of the neocons, like the first generation of neocons, so like the Irving Kristol and Norman Podhoretz and those guys were
Norman Podhoretz. He just died last week, Dave.
Oh, did he? Really? His son blocked me on Twitter after talking a lot of shit, and then I ratioed him up real nice. Yeah, that wasn't cool.
All I did was cite him saying we should kill every last fighting aged Sunni male in Iraq, and then the war will be won again for the Shiites. Norman Podhoretz's son John thought would be great. We'll give Skiri and Badr and Dawa a total victory. That'll show them.
Well, I know a lot of those the first generation guys were communists when they were younger. They were like Trotskyite guys. And I don't know about what the worms are, but there's something very interesting. And I know I've talked about this for many years. I'm sure you've made the similar points, that there is something like about the communist mind that it's almost like, oh, you could still really see a lot of traces of that in the neoconservatives, even after they're supposedly not communists anymore. But there is just something to me about listening to David Wormser here, where there's something, the profound sickness in believing in a theory, putting it into practice, watching utter disaster on like a biblical level unfold from it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know how to say it. You can't exaggerate it. I'm just looking for words powerful enough. You're talking about 1 million people getting slaughtered and 9 million people being displaced and tens of millions of people having lost loved ones and watched family members get horrifically injured, and all, like an ungodly level of human suffering was inflicted from your policy. And then your takeaway from that to be, no, the theory was still right. Let's run that again.
Well, and on top
theory
of that,
was still right. I've learned nothing. That did not make me go, yeah. And but to see that level of disaster was inflicted and not go, and by the way, just to be very clear here, because I know sometimes the theory bros get mad at me. I am not making a consequentialist argument when I say that. It's not a consequentialist argument. The point is that, you know, the same way that libertarians go, oh, it's really stupid when liberals will say communism works well on paper, but it doesn't work well in real life, because we all know, like, that's stupid. If it works on paper, then it would work in life, and that's what paper means, is that it works in real life. But the point is that if you build something and it's an utter disaster in reality, then you go, I got something wrong in the theory. The point isn't that because the consequence you don't do it. The point is that obviously your theory is wrong, and this theory is so obviously wrong. This, like, it is wild that this, and then, by the way, imagine, you know, all of these people, the podcast that this is being hosted on, and all of these Zionists all talking all day, you know, Ben Shapiro's speech the other day about how you must call out the offense of Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson platforms Nick Fuentes, and like, let's just say, let's stipulate for the record, let's say Candace is wrong about every conspiracy about Charlie Kirk, and Nick Fuentes is a horrible, hateful, anti-Semite bigot, right? Like, all of, let's say, for the sake of argument, all of that's true. How is this, what David Worms are doing right now, not infinitely more offensive than anything they've ever said? Like, the dude who has actually had power implemented a policy, which was a war that led to this level of human disaster, and he's still saying he got the theory right when it was completely disproven. Yeah, it's just insane.
And, you know, like, if his theory had been proven right, but this is what it took to achieve it, but we had a very, very friendly Iraqi regime in there or whatever, still, he would have to mention that, right? Look, it was a very steep cost. It was a horrible civil war. A lot of people got their corpses stacked like cordwood, and, you know, and their bodies found and picked up by the corpse trucks in the morning through this horrible civil war where we fought on our enemy's side and all of this. Nah, you know,
none of that.
Nope. Just, yeah, no, I'm still right. In fact, I want to hear the rest of that. He goes on to say, like, I was
here. He was Sunni. He wasn't Shiite. So you really begin to weld together the parts of Iraq into some sort of at least loose confederation. And so the Hashemites ruled Iraq from 22 to 1958. It wasn't a pie in the sky dream of doing something weird. It was resurrecting what happened before this wave of revolutionary radical thought possessed the Middle East and destroyed country after country, whether it was Egypt or whether it was Syria or whether Iraq. And so the idea was, let's go back to 58. Let's start over. It wasn't pie in the sky. By the way, in Clean Break, I also called for the cutting off of aid to Israel. People seem to forget that.
I didn't.
Just financial aid, not just civilian aid, not military.
Yeah, here, let's pause it for a second here. Yeah, this is the thing that they go off of. Again, this part, we're going to skip through this because it's just very boring. But it's like, they're big. Yes, look, dude, the Clean Break, it is true. The Clean Break had a few little nuggets of good ideas in there.
Which he says is just to suck up to the Congress, so that the U.S. Republican-controlled Congress will say, "Oh, he says free market sounding things a little bit." That's
no. It's when Dick Cheney goes, "We should cut the top marginal rates from 39% to 35% because that'll actually increase revenue, and then we'll have more money for the wars." It's like, it's that neocon type of logic where they believed in just they understood enough that like, yeah, the free market is kind of the engine of wealth, and we need that in order to keep buying bombs to go drop on people. So like, yes, he is correct about lowering rates will create more revenue or will create more, economic growth or something like that. It's like, okay, and yes, if we're completely fair here, in the clean break, it does say not that we should cut off all support to Israel, but that we shouldn't give them the few $1 billion a year, and that they should cut back on some of their social welfare programs so that they have a little bit more of a capitalist country, so that they have a higher GDP, so they don't really need the $3 billion a year, but we'll still give them all types of diplomatic and military and protection and shit like that.
Yeah, no, I mean, they say he says explicitly in there, he wants to cut civilian aid, not military aid.
Okay.
So
Okay.
$3.8 billion a year. Oh no, that is to be untouched. That goes without saying. They just wanted to cut a little bit of the aid that was going directly to the civilian government so that they could say they're making cuts, just as you're saying. And then the same thing, you heard him mention a little bit previously out of context, but this is in the clean break too, that Israel needs to get on board the missile defense train because Congress likes to hear that. Because Congress is bribed by the missile defense corporations. And so anything along, what Lockheed likes is what they like. And so this is something we want to do, again, just for the purposes of getting on Congress's good side, not for
it's always
their own
much like cutting taxes in order to get more revenue to fight wars. It's like they want to do maybe a little bit of the right thing for all the wrong reasons. But
and by the way, their economy was very commie at that time. So they really needed some free market reforms. And I think Netanyahu actually did embark on some of them, although, as you know, the vast majority of the land in Israel is owned by the Israeli national government.
Yeah, it's like a very socialist country. So like, but anyway, so there were some parts of the clean break where he's like, we should cut down on the Israeli socialism a little bit or something like that. And it's like, yeah, okay. And that people will almost be like, oh, interesting that Dave and Scott always omit that when they talk about the clean break. And you're like, yeah, it's just not relevant to any of the points that we're making. I don't know what, okay. Yeah, there's this other thing in there that I guess all things being considered is slightly better economics than socialism or something like that. Like, okay, I'm not sure exactly what that's supposed to mean. Let's jump ahead here a little bit because I want to make sure I get to this part before we wrap up.
And you know, if there's some more good stuff, maybe we could even go back and cut for the archive version some of the Dostoevsky kind of tangent at the beginning and stick with a little more of the substantive stuff that comes up later. If it's in there, I don't know.
Okay, let me can we go to Natalie, let's go to 34 minutes and 55 seconds. And this is I think another question about the clean break and AIPAC.
Failure in the Middle East. We couldn't anymore live with this internal failure because it wasn't containable anymore. It was coming to haunt us.
And by the way, we're not out of those woods yet.
No, I think now we're actually entering the woods even more thickly. No, there's two things about AIPAC. One is I think AIPAC is strongest when it aligns with what the administration was going to do anyway. And they didn't really stack up very many victories where they really stood against the administration. A few years before, there was the famous F-15 sales to Saudi Arabia, the AWACS sales to Saudi Arabia, and the conformal fuel tanks for the F-15s in Saudi Arabia, all of which AIPAC bitterly opposed, fought a real nuclear war against. Mm-hmm. And they lost on every one of them against a fairly friendly administration to Israel. So it was the Ford administration and afterwards the Reagan administration and so forth. So, yeah, the second thing that's the fallacy here is AIPAC hated the neocons. They hated us. They lobbied vehemently to keep me from entering the government. Originally, the idea was that I would become the senior director in the NSC for the Middle East. But they put up such a fight that Steve Hadley and Condoleezza Rice didn't want to have me. So John Bolton pulled me into state and then the vice president over the White House. They hated the crowd of Jews that went in. They had no interactions with us. Well, we were the children of the golden age of American.
All right, here
Judaism.
let's pause it here.
For a second.
Yeah. So hold on, pause it here, Natalie, and then the next one I want you to pull up is at 51 minutes and 19 seconds. But go ahead, Scott.
Oh, that's very interesting to know that there was that kind of faction fight between Steve Rosen and Keith Weissman and the leaders of the American Israel Public Affairs Committee and Pearl and his friends at that time. I didn't know that, but whatever, man. AIPAC still towed the line for the war the entire time from at least September 11th on, and they bragged about it. They put it in their briefing book to have all their lobbyists when they go to Congress to demand action against Saddam Hussein. It's going to work with Osama bin Laden to attack us with weapons of mass destruction and the entire line. And so they absolutely pushed it. And all that documentation is in Walter Mearsheimer's essay and book. But the essay, you can read it at antiwar.com, The Israel Lobby and American Foreign Policy.
And it's really worth reading the full book. It's an excellent, excellent book.
And by the way, you had a guy named Larry Franklin who worked for Douglas Feith in the Office of Special Plans, who later was indicted and prosecuted. And in fact, pleaded guilty in the end, I think or maybe he was just convicted by a jury. For giving top secret discussions of Condoleezza Rice and President Bush about Iran policy to Stephen Rosen at AIPAC, and got busted by the FBI. And it was a big investigation. And the FBI ended up investigating Wolfowitz and Pearl and Feith and others at the DOD. There was a separate investigation over somebody told Chalabi that they'd broken Iran's codes, and Chalabi told Iran that. And so there was a separate investigation on that. But it was, there's an article by Robert Dreyfuss called More Missing Intelligence. But when you go to The Nation, and yeah, whatever, he's a liberal, but I don't care. Take that article at The Nation and then, but put it, you got to go to the Wayback Machine, because at The Nation right now, the article's broken and it only has the first little part of it. But if you go put that URL in the Wayback Machine and look at an old version of it, it has the whole thing.
Okay, interesting. All right, let's keep playing, because there's just one more line that I really want to make sure we get to. Let's keep playing. I believe it's coming up here.
Meekish people. Well, let me start with the Iraq question. I think, given everything we knew then, and by the way, the Israelis, their intelligence did not believe there was major weapons of mass destruction programs. They had the same assessment we had more generally, that if given the chance, Saddam broke out, then he would resurrect his weapons of mass destruction programs. He was a man who wasn't going to stay contained. And he had a history of every 4 or 5 years launching major wars or killing 250,000 people if he couldn't launch a major war. And he did. He killed 500,000 people, 250,000 in the north, or 500,000 in the north, 250,000 in the south, in the decade before we went in. So there was a sense, we can't live with this guy. You turn your back on him. It's a wounded cobra, but a cobra will kill you even if it's wounded. And so I still think to this day, it needed to be done, but it did not need to be done the way it was done. I still, as I thought back then, this should be done by organizing a force of Iraqis. We had northern Iraq was free. You could have organized this force there. You could have trained an army. We could have given some assistance, but this really, Iraq should be liberated by Iraq. And it's the same thing with Iran. I think at the end of the day, the West, Israel, can give Iranians a chance with a weakened regime, but Iranians have to liberate.
Stop right there for a second.
Israel, not America.
You know, I think we would remember if he tried to stop him, Dave. Oh, yeah, no, we shouldn't have done it the way we did it. Who's we? Oh, we, literally him and his friends who did it. Yeah. Not we in the general sense where Americans accidentally take credit for or responsibility for their government's inappropriate behavior. But no, literally he and his friends did this. And he's not sorry. He just acts like it had nothing to do with him and was completely out of his control. And I'm sorry, because as long as I mentioned, and I did trail off on that train of thought. I'm sorry, I don't know what the hell I meant to say there about More Missing Intelligence by Robert Dreyfuss. But let me say this about it. It's an extremely important article because it has in here that Ariel Sharon created a rump unit inside the prime minister's office in Israel to manufacture fake intelligence in English to stovepipe up into the American intelligence stream. And Julian Borger has an article in The Guardian called The Spies Who Pushed for War that says the same thing. And also it's in James Bamford's book, A Pretext for War. But these guys, and Karen Katowski, the whistleblower, Air Force Lieutenant Colonel, who witnessed all this, she talked about Israeli generals marching around the Pentagon like they own the place, bursting into Douglas Feith's office, not being required to sign in, and all of this kind of thing. And now We should mention this, Dave, because it's important, man, sometimes that the dissenters will bring up that Sharon wanted Bush to go to Tehran first, not Baghdad. And that's correct. In fact, it was Netanyahu who was the Iraq hawk, and Sharon was more of an Iran hawk. However, W. Bush was an Iraq hawk, and the neoconservatives, and this may have something to do with the AIPAC split there. I'm not sure, but the former editor of the Jewish Daily Forward, J.J. Goldberg, wrote this great article one time where he makes sure to blame W. Bush and Dick Cheney for doing this. It's their responsibility, but still he goes in and describes how Netanyahu was closer to the neoconservatives in America. And so there was the confluence of interests there. And then Sharon ended up just getting on board and saying, okay, fine, we'll go to Iraq. But as I'm sure you remember, and people can find this, Sharon made this demand, and then John Bolton echoed him and promised that, yes, we swear, Mr. Sharon, we will go to Tehran and Damascus next. You can't just overthrow Saddam, but leave the Ayatollah Khamenei and his guys in power in Tehran, or they're just going to own Baghdad, dummy, was Sharon's position. But then he's like, well, if you're doing it anyway, I'll help you do it. But then you got to promise me you're going to do something about the Iranians. But see, this is where we get back to David Wormser and what his interrogator does not know here. What Wormser had promised, the quote in Tyranny's Ally, is a new free Shiite Iraq will be a nightmare for Iran. As he's sort of saying here, it's up to the Iranian people to overthrow it. Well, he thought the Iranian people would be so inspired by the regime change in Iraq that they would rise up and overthrow the Ayatollah then. Well, that was almost 3 years ago, Dave.
Yeah. No, it's and it's also, worth mentioning, right? Because people like to point out this, like Sharon, wanted to do Iran first. And like, if you want to say, as I've heard some say, look, even the fact that they'll kind of make the argument that, well, okay, the fact that Sharon got on board with the plan, well, that kind of sounds more like the U.S. is bullying Israel around than Israel's bullying the U.S. around. Yeah, he got on board with George W. Bush because, like, who was going to go against him at that time or whatever. But that kind of omits the fact that, obviously, as you mentioned, you got Benjamin Netanyahu, who goes on to be the longest serving prime minister, who he's not. Benjamin Netanyahu wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal and then testified before Congress right ahead of the vote on the authorization of the use of military force in Iraq. So it's clearly not just trying his best to influence America, both the American people and the American Congress, to support this policy of the war in Iraq. Ehud Barak wrote an op-ed in the New York Times, which was almost identical. It almost could have been copied and pasted from Benjamin Netanyahu's op-ed, where it literally said Saddam is the biggest threat. He's working on weapons of mass destruction. Positive reverberations will sweep through the region. And also Perez, the former Israeli prime minister who was mentioned earlier, who took over from Yitzhak Rabin, he wrote an op-ed in, I think it was in the Washington Post, that he wrote an op-ed, which again was the exact same. So you have like a long line of Israeli prime ministers publicly coming out attempting to move the American people toward this war. Like, again, call that whatever the hell you want to call it, but we're going to talk about it.
Right. And you also have, very importantly, the neoconservatives completely controlled the National Review, led by Jonah Goldberg, and then with Michael Ledeen and the rest of those kooks. And then Bill Kristol ran the Weekly Standard. And all these guys were the regulars on Fox News constantly. And then they also controlled the editorial pages of the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and the Washington Post. And it had a total lock. Krauthammer and Bill Kristol, David Brooks, Fred Hyatt, and all of these kooks up and down, all of those, all of the major newspapers' editorial pages. And then, of course, with the liberal New York Times, supposedly, with the Israeli agents, Judith Miller and Michael Gordon, writing all their lies about Saddam's quest to seek atom bomb components and all of that. And then, of course, and let me just mention, because as long as we're at it, I jotted them down. Yeah, the American Enterprise Institute and Heritage had been completely taken over by the neocons. Then they also had the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, the Project for a New American Century, the Jewish Institute for National Security Affairs, and the Center for Security Policy. This was really the the black hole, right? The center of gravity of the neoconservative movement in the think tanks at that time. And then, sometimes for some reason I always leave out Max Boot. I hate Max Boot. And I don't know if he was ever a commie, but he's basically one of them anyway. And, and of course, Brett Stevens at the New York Times, Rule Mark,
formerly
Garrett.
of the Jerusalem Post.
Yeah, formerly editor of the Jerusalem Post. That's right. Rule Mark Garrett was another one, and Victor Davis Hanson. People like revere this guy as some kind of smart guy because he said, "Oh yeah, this Iraq thing. This is just like the Peloponnesian War." Because I wrote about that once, and everything is just like that once, and so that's why we got to do this war. Absolute idiot. I don't know how anyone respects that guy at all.
I mean, listen, he's
any of them at that time.
Look. Victor Davis Hanson is probably the smartest in that group. But look, man, again, he just got everything so catastrophically wrong during the terror wars, just like the rest of them. And so at the very least, it's like, I don't know, dude, you got to wear that a little bit more. Like I was saying before, I mean, it's the communist mindset. This, you got to break a few eggs to make an omelet, the omelet, which never ends up coming. You can't get the war in Iraq this wrong. And then of course also get Afghanistan and Syria and Libya and Somalia and Yemen and all the rest of them all completely so catastrophically wrong. And then just act as if nothing happened and get right back to denouncing others for their wild conspiracy theories. Now, let me tell you about how Chalabi was really right, Scott. It's like, what are you talking about, dude? This is just too crazy. Anyway, here, Natalie, I want you to play, because I do got to wrap up soon. Play the one I just sent you, the clip with a timestamp. Start from there, because we got to get this one, because this is really, to me, was the comment of the entire interview. So let's let Wormser go for a second, because it's coming up here.
World pivots to a different direction.
Absolutely. Look, he was the last vestige of Arab nationalism. He was trying to resurrect it. We had faced 30 years, 40 years of a pro-Soviet Arab nationalist wave that claimed Lebanon, claimed Syria, claimed Iraq, claimed Libya, claimed Algeria, claimed a whole bunch of countries. We were afraid that if you let this genie back out of the bottle, it undoes the Cold War in the Middle East. It undoes our victory. And we needed to challenge that and shut it down. Also, in terms of Israel, we wanted the Yasser Arafat not to have the cavalry over the horizon in the form of Saddam, to use whatever he was given in Oslo to wage war.
How does that not concede the entire argument? I mean, look, I don't even understand exactly what he's saying here, but Scott, try to, again, the whole purpose of this interview was come in here and say, hey, this wacky Dave Smith guy is saying you're part of the Israel lobby who fought this war for Israel. And he's like, dude, that's insane. So Israel is the cradle of civilization, and we always need to protect Israel. And then he just lets this slip. When they go, why were we fight? Because it's finally drilling down on but why did we care about overthrowing Saddam to begin with? And he goes, well, look, here's the big picture, Scott. Arab nationalism was viewed as a major threat. And why is that? Well, because that could have made Yitzhak Rabin feel like he had this backup that was still coming. That could have given him a hint of nah, dude, time's on your side. There are these yes, I'm sorry, Arafat. I'm sorry, did I say Rabin? I meant that Yasser Arafat would have maybe felt like, hey, there's this movement of Arabs identifying as Arabs who are not tethered to the U.S. empire, who are out there, who may have your back in this fight, and they may one day be a real problem for that. Whoa, what? You just admitted that and didn't think that was a big deal? I'm sorry, dude. That's the whole argument right there. You literally just admitted that a major consideration for why you, the neoconservatives, wanted to overthrow Saddam Hussein was that the Israel-Palestine conflict might be helped from our point of view by it. Sorry, dude. That's the whole Merry Christmas, everybody. That's your Christmas present from Part of the Problem. David Wormser admits it in his whole words. I couldn't believe this. The entire interview, which was an exercise in refuting Hortonianism, just conceded the whole thing right there.
Yeah. Hey, I got a red bow. I got a red bow for the president here. Well, the West and its local friends must engage Islamist fundamentalism with better associates than the Baathists. So I don't care if you're worried about bin Ladenite terrorism. Saddam Hussein is, with the clean shaven chin and the French beret and the olive green uniform. Why? You don't want to ally like that against the guy with the long beard and the robe and the suicide bombers, because he'd be too effective, I guess.
Well, look, I mean, I'll end almost on saying, this will be my final comment, and then you could get your final one, and we'll wrap up. But there's a lot of things that are kind of exposed here. Look, one of them, just think about it in the present day, right? I could kind of understand where some people who are on the fence and maybe haven't done all the deep reading and stuff, they'd go, I don't know. I mean, you guys were kind of making a big deal out of Israel and Israel's role in all of this, but like, it's on George W. Bush and Dick Cheney. It's the US government. Israel's this tiny country, like whatever. But like, almost maybe you thought that about us for many years. Have you been paying attention the last 2 years? Have you noticed how like every single war hawk in this goddamn country, all the ones who supported Iraq and Afghanistan and Libya and Syria and Somalia and Yemen and Ukraine and all the ones who support all of the wars, they get a little weird when the topic of Israel's brought up, huh? It seems like it becomes the thing that they care about more than anything else. And that's pretty clear. Okay, well, that's interesting. And that's worth talking about and examining. And David Wormser is proving it for you guys right here. And look, like, the other thing that you notice is that in this very emotional, because it's purely like, even when you say all that stuff about Israel being the cradle of civilization, like, even if you believe that about ancient Israeli society, that has nothing to do with the modern government. There's nothing to do with the modern conflict. This is a religious view. It's an emotional view. And one of the problems with being emotional is you get irrational. You tend to believe things that aren't true. Now, look, it is insane to think that Saddam Hussein posed some legitimate threat to the state of Israel. It's insane to think that this was, like, even the actual argument he's making that Yasser Arafat would have felt some, Scott, I mean, we're not talking about 1979. We're talking about 2002, 2003. Like the defeated, humiliated Saddam Hussein, who didn't even have control of his own country. Like, Yasser Arafat was looking over at him going, yeah, me and that guy, we could take out the Israelis and the Americans. It's totally ridiculous. But of course, it's not a logical belief. It's an emotional belief. But what is the emotion here? The emotion is to protect Israel. And that's, everything else is like a rationalization given in an emotional, illogical one, but it's a rationalization to get back to that emotional starting point, which was, we got to protect Israel.
Yep.
David Wormser admits it. Final word to you, Scott.
Yeah, I mean, there's a great quote from Philip Zelikow, again, Condoleezza Rice's guy, more famous for being the principal author of the 9/11 Commission report. But he said, I'll tell you what this war is really about, and it's something that they don't really talk about very much, but it's Israel. But they don't really focus on that because, quite frankly, it's not a very popular sell. And so instead, we made it about weapons of mass destruction and the rest. Paul Wolfowitz also gave a famous interview to Vanity Fair where he said, well, we settled on weapons of mass destruction for bureaucratic reasons, when, the reality is we want to do this for all these others, including Israel, and including the absolute harebrained idiocy that, how one of the main, really the top reason that Al-Qaeda turned against the United States was our bases in Saudi Arabia that were used to bomb and blockade Iraq. Well, according to Wolfowitz, that's why we have to invade Iraq, so we can get those bases out of Saudi Arabia and move them to Iraq. And then it'll be fine. And of course, we're having this conversation 150,000 suicide bombings later, Dave. But mostly over there, right? If you don't count, like I saw old Eye Patch McCain arguing with you on Twitter that he stopped any more September 11th, except for that underpants bombing over Detroit that almost brought the plane down over Detroit. And except for Boston and San Bernardino and Orlando and, all of the other terrorist attacks, the Boston bombing, did I say Boston? All the absolute horrific attacks that actually have happened in this country since then because of these wars, and all based on these lies. And I'm really glad, right after this, what time is it? Here in just a few minutes, in 20 minutes, I'm going to interview Phil Turney, survivor of the USS Liberty attack again, who the Israelis tried to murder in 1967, along with, they successfully killed 34 sailors and attempted to sink the USS Liberty. And that's back in the news because Ben Shapiro wants to fight about it. All right, then Let's fight about it. And as you said, boy, after looking at the last 2 years, looking at how Israel swoops in and buys TikTok and CBS and CNN and Paramount just so that they can cram all this Zionist crap down your throat. And it couldn't be more obvious in broad daylight. They call to censor us all and all these things that like, maybe it is a good time to revisit what is the neoconservative movement and why do they love the Likud so much? And why did they lie us into Iraq War II and destroy the Middle East and get the entire, not just new decade and new century, but the entire third millennium off on the wrong foot? What is it about David Wurmser and those neocons? And then that's the answer. Everybody knows it. You see it right in front of your face. Greater Israel and their necessity of enslaving the American people to accomplish their goals for them that they can't possibly accomplish themselves. Simple as that.
Well said. Well, look, let's end this with first, I'll just issue the challenge on your behalf. I'll speak for you, Scott. But hey, David Wurmser, since you want to come around and kind of do these shows and try to correct the record, because I guess, these days we got a lot more of a big megaphone than you have. Why don't we set it up? Why don't we do a Scott Horton versus David Wurmser debate on this? And you can bring all your stuff about how Israel's the cradle of Western civilization, and we'll see how that does up against some pushback. I think I would love to see it. That'd be Bill Kristol round 2.
And I can guarantee you that our good friend Gene Epstein at the Soho Forum would be happy to host that in a very serious and professional atmosphere and all that. I'm willing to do a zero hedge debate too, whatever's on your mind. But if we want to do it right, I'll fly to New York and whoop them real good in front of everybody.
And not for nothing, Gene Epstein pays handsome fees for doing the thing too. So but absolutely, we could make that happen if David Wurmser wants to. That being said, Scott, thank you so much. Merry Christmas to you and yours. Where tell people again about the brand new academy that just launched, and I know the new Cold War course is up there, or at least part of it's up there now. So tell people all about the Scott Horton Academy and how they can go sign up for that.
Yeah. Well, so everything is YouTube shorts nowadays. I'm addicted to them too, but this is the long form. My Middle East course is 30 hours long, 25, 26 hours long. And part 1, the first half of my new Cold War course is also 30 hours. There's also great courses by Ramsey Baroud on Israel-Palestine, Bill Bupert on how we lost every war since 1945, James Bovard on COVID and Waco and drug wars and TSA and 40 years of badass investigative journalism there. I got Adam Francisco, a Lutheran scholar from Concordia University, debunking Christian Zionism. And very soon we're going to be adding CJ Kilmer on how Woodrow Wilson is the worst person who ever lived, Bob Murphy on the Great Depression and the New Deal. We're going to have something or another, I'm not sure yet, by Daryl Cooper, and lots of great stuff. So everybody go to scotthortonacademy.com and use promo code Christmas20 and you'll save 20%. Or if you are going to buy a lifetime subscription, especially use scotthortonacademy.com/POTP. And that way you'll get 20% off, the same 20% off a lifetime subscription, or 10% off on an annual subscription there. But use Christmas 20 on the annual and you'll get the 20% off. And it's been a huge success so far. I've got nothing but positive feedback. I busted my ass on it this whole last year to get this thing done for you. And I really hope that everybody gets something out of it. That's scotthortonacademy.com.